Majority of them were actually retail settings to where they had the optometrist inside the RDO location, but it's not clear at this point where the violation may be, if it's on just the RDO side, because it sounds like what they did is they essentially went into the location, the retail location, and they looked around to see if there was a notice posted. But that doesn't necessarily mean that in the optometrist's office that they're leasing space from, that it wasn't posted there. So the RDO and the optometrist are supposed to post similar notices. And that's a new requirement for the RTO program, because prior to that, the notice that they had to post was essentially a notice to consumers letting them know who to contact within that location to file a complaint, and not the education to the consumer about who regulates the profession and their rights to receive the prescription. So that's a new one, and I think that the overall message that was clear on the board staff side is we can do a lot more to educate the licensees on this requirement, and not only the optometrists but also the RDOs. And so the day that the article was posted, we also sent out email blasts to all the licensees. We also made sure that both notices, the RDO notice and the optometrist notice, is up to date on our website, which it is. And we're also working with the associations to get the word out as well, and to educate them about the importance and the requirement of the notice. So that's kind of where we stand now, and we've had conversations at the DOC meeting too, and those stakeholders are more than willing to get the word out and help educate. At the same time, we'll still obtain compliance from those complaints that we received from consumer action. It's kind of where we stand with that item. So any questions with that?
So I appreciate your outreach efforts. This is very interesting, and thank you for providing this information and using correction codes. It's extremely interesting. I suggest that staff consider that after this wave of outreach, that enforcement staff consider enforcement actions. You can pick the time period, but notice is going out and it looks like a problem. Don't know, but after a certain period of time when there's this blast of warning, that we begin to enforce the law. And our stakeholders are welcome to publicize that. Maybe that'll increase compliance, but rather than wait for consumer complaints.
Okay. All right. So you also have information related to some of the committees that I serve on for ARBO. We do have our annual meeting in June to discuss various issues. I think there's a couple important things that the committees are doing. One is the Executive Directors Committee that I serve on. That's all the executive directors of all the regulatory boards serve on this committee. And right now, my main focus is increasing the communication between all the boards nationwide, to sharing the same information and be able to not have to wait for a yearly meeting to communicate. We want to have more frequent meetings to discuss issues that we're facing and ways that we're addressing it. And we had requested in the past that ARBO create a forum for the EDs and EOs to go to be able to access data information that ARBO maintains and often sends out surveys to all the boards on behalf of another board, but there's not really a central place for us to go for that location. ARBO is still looking into it. They're concerned about costs and the efficacy of doing that and the resource drain. So in the meantime, though, I had suggested to the group where there's a secret group a secret Facebook group that is controlled with just those executive directors and executive officers. It is subject to any kind of PRA request, so there's not any confidential information shared. It's more of a best practices and things that are happening that we want to stay apprised of. If a board has a bill that's happening, we want to make sure the quickest way to get that information, and that seems to be working right now. So I think that's a good one for all of the boards to be able to stay more apprised and up to date of the stuff that's happening in real time. So that's been really helpful for us.
So just to clarify, it's not literally a secret site, it's a permissions-based.
Correct.
site.
That's the level of permission. So
Right.
you have to be invited. You can't find it. It's you're right.
Fine in this world.
Sorry, that was a technical term
That's
of
okay.
the
No,
type
I
of
just,
permissions.
you have to understand the world I live in now. So I want
Yeah,
to
by secret I mean
clarify.
very not secret, but
Permissions-based.
yeah,
Okay, on a need-to-know basis.
correct. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. And we're back on webcast.
Okay. And so those are the main thing with the committee meetings. On the bylaws committee, there is an interesting amendment to the bylaws, and that's to allow an executive director or an executive officer to serve on the board at ARBO. Currently, it's not permitted. There's been a lot of discussions amongst the EDs and the EOs that they are not heard, and oftentimes there's national decisions being made and they don't have the implementation side of it. And so they wanted to have a voice on the board in order to help guide discussions. There's been a fairly controversial topic. There was the first round of amendments involved striking the composition of the board and making it to where it's out of 8 members, 7 of them had to be professional members. My concern that I raise is that's kind of sending the opposite message that we want to send as far as making it solely a professional run board. It's kind of the opposite direction that all the boards are going in. And it also takes away the ability for any public board member to serve on the board. And so they had amended that again after the committee meeting, and now it's mandating that there is at least one ED or EO serving on the board, and then the remaining positions are open to any board member to serve on it. So I think it's a good addition to the bylaws. There's a lot of discussions of whether or not it'll be passed, but I can provide an update after the meeting.
Thank you.
The next one is the FBI RAC Program, and there's not much of an update right now because there's not much movement right now. The responses that DOJ has given to DCA doesn't entirely add up, and I think that I've been following up with DCA Legal several times to make sure that they know we are still interested and we're not going to go away. I think that this is a huge consumer protection issue that we need to be addressing, and quite frankly, when DOJ, I provided you their response, but they referred to a bill that was actually not a correct bill that they were referencing. So I've asked for clarification for that, but the bill they referenced said it was from 2012, and they were looking into the issue, and they're going to create work groups and to fix it. And so that was their response, is we're still going to create work groups, but that was from 2012. So nothing's been done since then. And so to me, I think this is something that we still should push and to fight for, because I think this is a bigger issue. So, but it's very, very political, and it's going to be a fight, but I think it's a fight worth being in. The strat plan update, I provided you an update of each section, and each section was also presented to the committee members during the committee meetings. And the main thing that under the licensing section, I did ask for feedback from the board. It's kind of twofold to improve the licensing process. And for promoting Breeze. What we're proposing is, instead of using the remittance coupon on the bottom of renewals, on the paper renewals, we would like to remove that completely and do similar to what VRN is doing, to where it's just a notice that goes to the licensees referring them to Breeze. It would also, in the notice, let them know if they have any deficiencies. So if they don't have fingerprints on there, it'll be on the notice to let them know ahead of time that they have to go get their prints, and then they can be referred to Breeze. I think that that's the best way to really capitalize on Breeze, and the fastest way to get their renewals processed. So, but that's also a really big change to how it's been done in the past, and so we wanted the board's approval before pursuing with that change in the system. As you may recall, at one of the last board meetings, we had also talked about, instead of printing and mailing, we wanted to have the PDF license up on their own account. So we're proceeding with that, and I think that that's going to be really helpful, and I think it's going to save costs. And I think it's also easier for the licensee, because they won't have to they won't have to wait for any mailing. They can print it out at any time. And it's something where it's unique to that account, so it's not accessible to anyone who wants to use that document. And it kind of removes the need to do a replacement license transaction, which is another cost, another resource drain, because at any time they can go and print their own license. So I think that that's a good thing for the board to be pursuing, but I would like some guidance from the whole board, but also mainly the professional members of their thoughts on how that would work for the board.
I just have a comment, that also includes SLDs and CLDs too.
Correct.
Great.
And the DOC committee did like it, and they approved it going forward, because I wanted to make sure we had both viewpoints, yeah.
So then, Jessica, I have a question about, what about the RDOs, because they have to have a separate with.
Same thing, so it would be,
RDO.
yeah,
Just go in and do that and get it, that's what they post in their locations.
Right.
That's also accessible.
yeah, so it would be whatever it looks like when it's printed and mailed, it would look the exact same in the PDF version of it.
So,
Absolutely great.
having gone through renewal just recently, it was a little confusing. Once I got the in the mail letter, it almost felt to me like I was planning to do Breeze, but then I got this, and
Right.
it feels like you're asking me to do it on paper.
Right.
And so I agree with that suggestion that you had about taking away that little slip, because then it'd be less confusing and just kind of keeps things streamlined with Breeze. The PDF, does it have to be access to color printing, or is that going to make a difference?
No,
So it'll be okay.
whatever printer you want to use, you'll be able to use.
Okay.
And you can print it more than once?
Yep.
That's great.
For multiple offices.
Awesome, yeah. Any other comments to Jessica on that? Sounds like you have buy-in.
That's
Right.
great.
So the enforcement and licensing program updates are there for your review. The main thing for enforcement is what we had said the last meeting too. The main focus still remains the cases that are over a year. We are getting through those cases slowly but surely. And it helps that we do have Alex, he is now in enforcement, he's handling all of the RDO cases, so that's helpful. And I think we're very lucky to have him. He comes from a good background, he has some enforcement knowledge, and I think we're going to be able to capitalize on that. With licensing, Rob, do you want to give a quick update on the licensing program and the progress that we've made?
Sure. Let's see. So obviously she kind of highlighted the fact that, or just highlighted the fact that we're really pushing to use Breeze really in every aspect. So we did a lot of outreach. We sent some emails in January and March just to tell people about Breeze, that should register and renew on Breeze. Optometrists or initial optometrist applications, the majority of them are received online, I think 94%, so we have really good Breeze usage there. The branch office license, fictitious name, and some licensures, not as much. However, the emails that we sent out, we actually saw last month a pretty good increase, between 10 and 13% increase in Breeze usage just from those license types. So I think if we continue with that outreach, we're going to also increase that Breeze usage, which obviously is one of the goals, and it's on our strategic plan as well. As far as the optometrist applications that have been submitted this last quarter, this is kind of the busy season. So the amount of applications we've gotten has tripled. With that, the time periods have gone up a little bit, about 24%. We are still managing. As far as renewals go, Breeze is obviously by far the best way to renew. Optometrist renewal times have dropped even more so. So last quarter they dropped about 3 days, the turnaround time, which is about half the cycle time for the fiscal year. The other license types, state no licensure, fictitious name, branch office, with the exception of a couple of outliers they're on the stats, but I eliminated them because they really don't apply. It's basically a same day turnaround time. So basically it's 0 days to renew those three license types, average across the year. So it pays for them to use Breeze. We want to keep pushing it. RTO program's a little bit different right now with regard to the renewals. The initial application for RTOs, the cycle time obviously went up because we did have or we did lose our RTO coordinator, but we have gotten Brad Gardner in that place, and then we also have Kelly Flores, the former RTO coordinator, helping out. So those
Before you keep moving on.
Yes. Sir.
The license application cycle time,
Mm-hmm.
that blip of increase in time was not related to our processing, it was more related to waiting for certain information that's needed for their application, is that?
Which one are you looking at?
So I'm looking
Which
at
specific license type?
optometry. The license application cycle time is
Yes,
going
that
up
should-
a little bit, but it was related to them starting their application process, not having all the information provided to you.
Correct. Yeah, that's going to factor into these stats. I mean, we are going to, I mean, we have the opportunity to kind of pull those out because there is a milestone that we can record where it kind of pauses that period of time. But these don't reflect that. This is basically a beginning to end time frame. So it's not going to be accurate in that sense where it's like, hey, these stats are reflecting the time that we're waiting. But it is, you know, if you wanted to find out the average time it takes to go from start to finish, this is going to represent that. But with regard to the RTO program, as I said, the initial licensor cycle times have gone up because we lost the coordinator, but in the last quarter they've gone precipitously down. So February and March, you can see that they've dropped a pretty significant amount, and that's just a result of board staff pitching in, putting in some overtime, and then obviously we've gotten significant help from DCA with them loaning us some people to help us out. And then one of those people that we have is Abby, who's working in the receptionist capacity, and she's been a great help. She's a full-time person, and she's there until Priscilla Torres returns from maternity leave. But we're very, very grateful to have that help. It's really been a lifesaver. With regard to the RTO renewals, those are a little bit of a one-off right now, just because it looks like a lot of the spectacle lens and contact lens dispensers, many of these renewals are not instantly processing the way the other license types that I mentioned are, simply because many of these do not have fingerprints on file. So the time it takes for us to discover that they don't have fingerprints on file, contact that registrant, get the live scan done, get those results in there, and then have them renew, that's what's factoring into these stats. So obviously they're going to be higher because that's going to throw it off, because it depends on their cooperation and their, I mean, I guess their willingness to get those
So is there
fingerprints.
a way for you to measure once all information or all materials are received and then start timing it from then? Because
I mean, we
that's
could,
obviously
but
not
realistically, I think if they're paying their fee and they already have fingerprints, it's going to be a 0-day turnaround every time. There's really not a whole bunch of X factors that go into that renewal cycle time. It's basically just you pay the fee and you renew.
That's my point.
Mhm.
We're not really reflecting that in our
Right. Right, but I wanted to make sure it was accurate, because if you're looking at the actual time that it takes, if somebody was to say, well, how long does it take, or they're on their end thinking, oh, the board takes this long, this is what it looks like, but realistically there is an extenuating circumstance, because it depends on their participation and their ability to, hey, I'm going to go get my fingerprints done right now. Then they have to get sent over to DOJ and FBI, and that takes time. It could be rejected, it could be bad fingerprints, and that gets factored in there. We are trying to work proactively with getting that fingerprint issue resolved. So I'm in contact with OIS to find out if we can pull additional fingerprints if they exist in a holding tank, because there could be some fingerprints that weren't necessarily transferred over to the record and fulfill that requirement without their intervention, the registrant's intervention. And then I'm also contacting DOJ to see if we can get basically a rundown of all the fingerprints that they've had done or that they've submitted to us, because they do have to have fingerprints done through DOJ and FBI. So if they call in and say, I had my fingerprints done, and it turns out they only had DOJ, well, you still have to get FBI. So we want to make sure that we get that done as well.
So you're kind of taking on the responsibility of the applicant. So to go back is there an easy way for you to track once the applicant has submitted all information they are required to, us time it from that point on? Is it too difficult to separate that out?
There might be. I mean, I think that's something, because it's something that kind of exists with the initial applications where I was talking about that milestone, but it doesn't exist currently on the renewal portion of it.
And how, sorry to jump
No.
in, with renewals, how it works is once they met the requirement, especially for the RDOs, it's that they've applied to submit the online application, paid the fee, and they have the fingerprints. So once that's done, it's an overnight job that will renew all of them. So it's renewed in the same day. So once they have that, it's going to be automatically renewed. So it's nothing for the board to then measure.
Yeah, the only other one-off could be if they make a partial payment, because then it technically starts that clock, but obviously they need to make that full payment in order to get renewed. So that could be a one-off as well.
Another thing I wanted to add for the licensing program is actually a pretty big one for all of the schools in California, the 3 schools. We are up, we did demonstrations, rapid demonstrations with SCSCO and Western to utilize electronic submissions of transcripts. And so they received their demos, they're ready for graduation in May. Berkeley already does something similar with electronic transcripts. They essentially notify us and they give us a code. We go in and we can print the transcript from there. So it's still first source from them. It's just going to eliminate all of the mail time and it getting lost in the mail and all the headaches. It'll all be electronic and we can upload it to the record.
Jessica, when would the final cutover date be for all boards to go strictly to the Breeze system and eliminate the paper system?
That's up in the air on the boards. There are some boards who want to keep a lot of the paper. There's some boards who aren't in Breeze because they were supposed to be rolled into Breeze and they're not in Breeze yet. And there's other programs who are in the legacy system still. So it's really, there's not a set timeline at all these boards are going to be paperless. But I can tell you the stuff that we're recommending now in the system is we're going to be the first to do the PDF version instead of printing the initials. We'll be the first for that, and we'll be the second because BRN did remove the remittance coupon. So we're really in the forefront of fully utilizing Breeze.
Great, thank you. And this last 6%, I know it's not a big number, a big deal, where we've indicated that 94% online usage over the fiscal year. Do we see a way we can capture that last holdout group, or are they the I only want paper and?
Well, I can tell you that paper applications are no longer available online. We did take that down, and we provided a link to Breeze. So I think that it's going to get there to it because they won't have access to the paper.
And pretty soon then these other online applications for statement of licensure and branch office license should see some nice upticks as people become more familiar with Breeze from their personal licensing.
Correct.
And I think it's also helping that when we go to the schools, we're really highlighting Breeze to the third year students to where that's their reality. They're not thinking, oh, I'm just going to have to print out this form and fill it out. They're thinking, oh, I'm going to hop onto Breeze and get it done.
For the students, like asking you to print something.
Right.
That is so archaic.
I know.
I mean, it's all online.
Yeah, and that's why when I first talk to them, I'll usually say, you guys probably don't know this, but you actually could not apply online, a couple of years ago. So.
Great, okay.
And Jessica, do you think Breeze, maybe in the future, would ever provide any tracking for CEs for doctors or?
Yeah, that's something that several boards are looking at to how we can fully utilize Breeze for CE. So that's currently being discussed. Yeah.
So, thank you. This is really good news. Kudos to staff. In addition to telling the board about this good news, I think we should try to tell the world about this good news.
President's message, I'm going to steal that as an idea for a president's message. Thank you.
Yeah, something, because, there is a limited audience as to news of this nature, but perhaps the associations would be interested in saying how easy it is to get the renewals and the applications or something related to the optometry schools, to have them even publicize it more based on a press release or an informative piece or president's message to trumpet that we're not all about putting optometrists slapping their licenses, but we want to make the regulatory process easier.
Yeah, and the association has been great in helping us get that word out and educating them more about Breeze. And I alluded to it previously when we went to their Ledge Day, we had a whole section that was devoted just for Breeze. And we also went up and mingled with the licensees, asked them if they heard about Breeze, told them they could just do it on their phone with any kind of questions, give us a call. So they all seemed really receptive and they really appreciated the idea.
And the success rate should be trumpeted as well, because if you're recalcitrant and you see everybody else doing it, that provides further impetus to join the band.
Yeah. Okay, with that, personnel is, the update is provided, and I think we've already alluded to how personnel is going right now, and our budget reports are also included in that. The main thing with the budget that has sort of changed with the RTO program before at the last presentation from the RTO program was that the fund was stable enough to proceed with an occupational analysis of the 2 exams without a budget change proposal. However, since then, but that was because there were cost savings for not filling that vacant position, and now the vacant position is filled, those cost savings are not there anymore, and so they did recommend to proceed with a BCP. However, because the BCP, we're talking fiscal year 1920 right now, so that delays it. And I know, especially from the DOC standpoint, they'd rather not delay doing that occupational analysis. So I've spoken with OPES, which is the vendor who's providing the OA and the interagent and the linkage study. That I asked them if there's any way at the end of the day, if we do run out of money or if it's getting too tight, are there other mechanisms that we can do to the contract to amend the contract to pay them over future fiscal years? And they said they're willing to work with us in the budget office to make that happen so we don't have to delay the OA. So I think that's good news for us to just continue the process. The budget office did say that it's going to be tight, but it's probably doable to do this fiscal year, next fiscal year. So that's the way we're going, but everybody's looking very closely at how that's going to impact the fund.
How far away are we from merging checking accounts and just being one board with one fund?
That's really, at this point, if that's what the board wants, I think at the last time we were kind of waiting to see. But I think from an implementation standpoint, it makes sense. It would be a lot less resource strain and less duplicative work, because right now we have to keep them completely separate. Right now it's, you can see in both the budgets, there's the allocation under the budget for $86,000. That's for the board to build the RTO program for the services we provide. So we have to provide percentages of the amount of time that we spend on the program, so we can transfer money from one fund to the other. So it's really cumbersome. But
Would it just be a regulation?
No, it would be a statute
It's a
change because the
statute.
funds are created in statute. So it'd be a request of the legislature, but as you know, the legislature was supporting that to merge them. So it's really just the will of the board of when you would like to see that happen.
And we can't do anything about it right now anyway, right? Because it's not a topic of discussion.
We'd have to put it on the agenda, correct?
So then it couldn't happen until next year.
Yeah,
Well, we're talking about
I think we're talking about the budget. I think it's
We
within
can't.
the two funds.
the funds, yeah. You
Okay.
could talk about it.
And there is the omnibus bill where they are going to merge the acts or combine the acts, not merge them. They're combining it, where it just technically changes them to the one section. And so it could be an ask that we ask them this
Yeah.
session to do it at the same time.
What's the will of the board on that? Grandfathering it in, the current action?
Are there any negative implications that you can see from merging these funds?
Well, I think that the concerns that the board had relayed to the legislature during sunset was that the RTO program wasn't going to sustain itself, and we
But
wanted
it's
to
going
monitor it.
though, isn't it?
It is sustaining itself and performing well. And I think there was concerns that you would lose some kind of tracking mechanisms to keep them separate and to make sure that if something happens, one fund isn't sustaining the other. And I think that DCA Budget Office, when they came and presented, they gave various ways of still monitoring that to making sure that doesn't happen. So currently, I don't see a negative to merging the funds.
Great.
Do we need a motion on that?
I would request a motion for that because that's requesting a legislative change.
Action, yes. Do I,
I would motion that we merge the optician and optometry funds into one general fund under the board's supervision.
I'd like to second
A special fund, but
I'd like
yeah.
to second that, definitely.
we have the second,
I'd second.
and now we'll take a roll call vote. I'm sorry, public comment. So much time. I know, thank you. Public comments?
Yeah. Well, so
talking about statute.
we are talking about statute because the funds are done in statute. They have two separate funds. But it's also, so we're also proposing the statutory change for the omnibus bill to do the technical move from the RTO statutes over to under our chapter. And so that's also something that.
Last time we talked about moving the statute, we talked about seeing that in print and having a lot of conversation, so I think if we're talking about moving the money, that's fine, but I thought we talked about
Yeah.
like a bigger process when it came to the statute.
Right, so at the last, I want to say the last board meeting and then the Reg committee meeting prior to that, there were some recommended ledge proposals that actually Mina has spent quite a bit of time on to do the technical move for the statutes, and that's what the board had proposed to the Senate B&P committee to put into their omnibus bill, which they have told me that they are accepting and they're going to put it into the bill. And so
I'll just hold my conversation for the
okay.
bigger bill.
Yeah. That's all this is, just to get it into the system.
So it'd be something the board would ask to include that as well in the change.
Hi, Karen Cortes on behalf of the California Optometric Association. I just want to verify because I remember last time DCA went over really in comprehensive format what merging the funds look like. And just to verify, they did say you could still track, even though it's one fund, optometry versus RTO money. Yeah, okay. I think that was our only concern, just making sure optometry is not subsidizing the RTO program. Thank you.
We hear that.
So I remember this discussion now that you've refreshed my recollection. And I was one of the people before that opposed the merging because I wanted us to be able to flag to the legislature, hey, you're not funding the RTOs. But I'm much more comfortable now based on it was maybe a year ago or maybe even more that the RTO fund is being funded adequately, so I have less concern today.
Any other public comment? Okay, motion. It's on the floor. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, go.
Ms. Van Vine,
Aye.
Dr. Tretzky.
Aye.
Ms. Michelin, aye. Ms. Garcia.
Aye.
Dr. Coverdge.
Aye.
Dr. McIntyre.
Aye.
Mr. Mordoni. Aye. Ms. Salazar-Sperber.
Aye.
And Dr. Wong.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Marks than Mr., Mrs. and Dr.
I know. Too many balls in the air.
Counselor next.
Yeah.
That's it.
JVO.
Now, we will go ahead and take our lunch break and let's reconvene at 1:30 if we could, please. So we need to extend it 10 minutes, if you will, so we can go ahead and adjourn that. Okay, now we're ready. Thank you. Thank you and welcome back. We're in the afternoon session of the California State Board of Optometry, and we are going to take agenda item number 11 out of order to accommodate a travel schedule. Chris, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and then providing the DCA update.
Of course, thank you. Christopher Castrillo, Deputy Director from the Office of Board and Bureau Services for the Department of Consumer Affairs. Thanks again for the opportunity to come down here and brief you today. Wanted to provide a couple of different updates. New staff at the department, new executive staff, a couple of meetings that we have going on as part of our ongoing efforts to engage the board. So I'll start at the top. We have a new Deputy Director of Legislation. I know he's had the opportunity to meet with your Executive Officer, Mr. Dennis Cuevas Romero. Before coming to DCA, Mr. Romero was a Government Relations Director at the American Heart Association / American Stroke Association in Sacramento since 2016. He was a Legislative Associate at the Financial Strategy Group from 2013 to 2016. And a postgraduate law clerk at the Sacramento Regional Fair Housing Commission in 2012. Mr. Cuevas Romero joined our team last month, and he's been looking to get around to each of our boards. As I mentioned, had the opportunity to meet with Jessica, other executive officers, and we explore the opportunity to meet with you all. So we're really happy to have him aboard. With that, we have a full executive team over at DCA, so we're really excited about that. Wanted to touch a little bit on our DCA leadership training. We recently had a cohort of our future leaders from the Future Leadership Development Program graduated from this program in March. We're looking to launch the second cohort. We frankly got a ton of positive feedback from this program, essentially looking to groom the future leaders of the department. From all of our boards and bureaus, staff who are looking to take that next step. A lot of great opportunities to engage with folks from agency, whether that's our agency secretary, the appointment secretary. They've met with legislative staff, had the opportunity to do sit-downs with the director, and then kind of engage in a cohort project. We thought it was a really, really great program. Our director's committed to continuing that program. We're going to talk a little bit more about it at our director's quarterly meeting on the 30th, but we'll just put that out there as an opportunity for not just optometry staff, but all of the staff of the boards and bureaus at DCA to participate in. So we're really excited about kicking that off again. About the Director's Quarterly, that's coming up on April 30th. This is our second one of the year. We're going to be hosting this with our board executive officers and our bureau chiefs. These quarterly meetings are intended to provide the opportunity to each of our programs, their executive officers and the bureau chiefs to interact with the department, kind of help us drive the agenda of items that are of common interest to all of our programs, and to provide updates on some of the ongoing issues that we've been working on, a couple of them as they pertain to our strategic plan. One of those items in particular, last week, trying to keep my dates right, the Licensing and Enforcement Work Group Committee. This is a strategic plan item that the department has embarked upon this year, essentially taking a group of enforcement staff from all of our programs across the department, group of licensing staff from all of the programs across the department, having bi-monthly meetings where we're going to get together, share best practices, take a look at some of the data that our data governance team is able to take a look at, which I'd say especially for our Breeze boards, we're able to look at some really, really good metrics, identify what programs are doing really, really well on whether that's licensing intake or enforcement intake, and ask them to share, hey, if you're doing something well, what is it that you're doing, so we can maybe share that with a board who might be struggling or dealing with a backlog or what have you. So we kicked those off last week. We're really excited to get those going. I've spoken with your executive officer about having staffing engaged in those work groups, both on the enforcement and the licensing side. So stay tuned for hopefully some best practices that are going to come out of that work group that we can share with all of our boards and bureaus to help them both on licensing and enforcement. Jessica and you all are talking a little bit about online and kind of driving to the online application, kind of like these are the kind of things that we want to talk about and encourage and engage with our boards to help kind of turn around some of these times. So very excited that's been started. Next Monday, big meeting coming up, the Substance Abuse Coordination Committee. This is on Monday, April 23rd. This is a statutorily required reconvening of all of our executive officers from our healing arts programs to take a look at Uniform Standard number 4 specifically. Back in 2010, 2011, we convened the Substance Abuse Coordinating Committee again with all of our executive officers from the healing arts boards to basically draft a set of uniform standards, 1 through 16, I believe. SB 796 from last year requires us to get this group back together and specifically take a look at Uniform Standard number 4, which deals with drug testing frequency for probationers in the probation program. That's going to be on Monday, April 23rd. I presume that we're going to have more than one meeting on this topic. So again, stay tuned for sort of the outcomes from that meeting and any potential changes to the uniform standard that might come as a result of that. Last thing I want to leave you all with, as kind of I always do with these, are board member orientation training. Again, these are required for any board member who's been appointed or reappointed to a board within 1 year of your appointment or your reappointment. These trainings are held in Sacramento. Just want a quick reminder on the dates, and we also send these out via email, so you don't have to hurriedly jot these down. Just so you know, June 6th is going to be our next training. September 18th will be our fall training, and December 5th will be our last training of the year. As always, if you have any question about this training, any of the other required trainings, any of the ongoing meetings that I mentioned here today, please don't hesitate to reach out to our office, the Office of Board and Bureau Services, for any questions or assistance you might need. With that, I'll open up the questions you all have.
So on that specific subject?
Yeah.
There used to be trainings down in Southern California?
So,
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up. So I'll say, not to deflate any balloons, for this year with our dates set, the dates that are set are going to be in Sacramento for 2018. However, we've had a couple of conversations now about that very issue. We've got some interest in hosting a Southern California date in 2019. I'm personally very open to it. I think we just want to make sure that we have the critical mass, if you will, that if we are going to have that date, that we're going to have a number of Southern California board member representatives to kind of make it worth your while, if you will, to fill the room. But I would expect to look out for that in 2019. That affects some of you, and not others, but yeah.
It doesn't sound like there's any interest in having one in the Bay Area, but doesn't.
Look, I mean, I'm open to kind of meeting the needs of what our board members do. I'll just tell you that the reason Southern California comes up is one, we've done in the past, and two, it seems we have a number of board members from that area, and so getting back to this kind of critical mass question, there seems to be that there for Southern California. I haven't quite heard it from the Bay Area, but I don't want to just summarily say no.
You did. At least 4 years ago.
Okay.
In the Bay Area.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, you've heard us talk about legislation that the board is supporting, and we're sending Jessica to the Capitol to work on this. When does board-supported legislation ever get the support of the agency?
Yeah.
What are the triggers for you guys to kind of get involved in?
Yeah, and I have to apologize because I said this when I came over here earlier when I was talking about the webcasting issue. Being 6 months in, there's still some things that I'm kind of learning. The ledge lane, while I'm somewhat connected to it, is also sort of its own thing. So I don't really have. I don't know.
Okay.
Not certain. Yeah.
Just to help out a little bit, historically DCA, it's rare for DCA to take a position on a bill. I know that because they are appointed by the governor's office, they have to get it approved through agency and the governor's office. And so when they do take a position, I can't even think of the last time they took a position on a bill, but it has to be pretty wide and have huge consumer protection impacts in order for them to weigh in on it. And it's a process for them to be able to take a position, and I think it's really rare.
And I have a question for you.
Sure.
In the past, presidents were invited to at least one of those quarterly phone calls.
Yeah. So that was we had our annual the one in January was our where we
One and
invited
only.
board presidents. Again, coming into this position, sort of this balance of how things have been done, where balancing having that annual meeting for our board presidents, which again we did in January, also the opportunity for our executive officers and bureau chiefs to come in. So long way of getting to, there might be other avenues for us to look at to continue engaging board leadership, because I know it's important for the director as well.
It would be great to be a part of those conference calls.
Cool.
Yeah, very informative.
Point very well taken. Yep.
Anything else for Chris while we have him? Going once, twice, train's going.
Okay.
Thank you for coming from Sacramento.
Seriously, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, let's circle back now to agenda item 8, if we could please. And for consumer protection, the request is that we spend about 20 to 30 minutes on that specific committee report. I know guidance is typically spend about 10 minutes on your committee reports. This one, it has an agenda full. So we'll start with that, and then we'll move through to the rest of the committees. So Mark will be leading this discussion.
I will, okay.
Ready when you are,
Pull up the,
and if not, I'll move.
why don't you move on for a second?
I'll pick another committee. How about public relations and outreach?
So I can give the update on this one. The committee reviewed a lot of the progress that the board has made on the outreach campaign, which is a lot of really great outreach. We provided a lot of links on the strategic plan update for the videos we created for the children's vision, and a lot of the stuff that we're doing with the DCA publications team. We are set to have the spring newsletter be posted at the end of April, early May. The Public Relations and Outreach Committee did approve the content to that, and so they're working on finalizing the design. We're kind of in the queue to update our website to make it more modern and more user-friendly. The one action that we're requesting from the committee, from the board, is that you approve the proposed amendments to the online refractions brochure. There should be an attachment for the concerns that were outlined by 1-800 contacts of the potentially misleading information that's on the online refraction brochure. Typically, the information posted on our website does not need board approval. That's captured in the day-to-day activities of my job. But when it's a controversial issue like this was, and it is, the board had approved this brochure and the specific verbiage, which is why we have to bring it back to the board for any amendments. So with that, the 1-800 contacts did offer a solution verbiage, and the committee appreciated it. And I think Dr. Tresky, and I don't want to speak for you, but said it was better than what it currently is.
Yeah.
And so the request from the committee to the board is to approve the amendments so we can make them and post them on our website.
Okay, anyone want to speak up from that committee? Add anything to this? Yes.
Yes, I do. I don't know if this is the right time, but I'm just really excited about bringing this up. And I've mentioned it to Jessica a few times. We have now have Moore Park Community College students. We've invited doctors to come and speak. Great information. They come in with a PowerPoint presentation. Moore Park requires that they submit their CV or their resume. I'm wondering if the board would ever consider, when a doctor comes to Moore Park, that they would be considered for a CE credit. And they're giving a presentation about the health advisor, anything on anatomy of the eye.
I think you have to bring that.
That's what I want to
I
bring
think
up.
that's I think that would be a future
practice
agenda item, and we would have to do a regulation change.
But send it through practice and education versus consumer protection.
That or ledge reg, because it's a regulatory change. But either one.
Okay.
So I move to accept the proposed language on the online refraction brochure.
Oh, okay. Any comments, other comments from the board?
I'll second.
Oh, I will make one comment that, just a grammatical comment. The clinical data captured by the technology is reviewed by a California licensed eye practitioner who uses their independent judgment, should be his or her independent medical expertise. So either California licensed eye care practitioners and use the word their, or solo practitioner and use the words his or her. Just grammatical. That's one of the things that annoys me, like, irregardless.
Well, actually, I don't know what the convention is at DCA or the state, but speaking from my experience at the university, these grammatical rules are changing, so sometimes
But I don't change.
there is becoming more accepted as being non-gender specific. But anyway,
I will defer to
I don't care.
Ms. and Dr. Morzell.
I don't care.
I actually agree that is a change that's been going on, and so I believe that the current verbiage would stand as more current to being correct.
Then I withdraw my comment.
Okay, discussion first though. Dr. McIntyre, any comments?
I actually like the change in verbiage. It outlines that this is just a renewal. It's not a determination of a prescription. I like it.
Ms. Garcia?
I don't have any further comments on this.
Mr. Mordomi?
No comment.
Ms. Michelin? Dr. Turetsky?
Nada.
Dr. Wong? Dr. Kawaguchi? Ms. Salazar Sperber? Get it all out in one. Okay, we're ready for a vote.
Public comment.
I asked. Oh, I did. Public. I did it again. Because they all leave. Okay, any public comment to the CM? No. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Brandby.
Aye.
Dr. Turetsky.
Aye.
Ms. Michelin, aye. Ms. Garcia.
Aye.
Dr. Kawaguchi.
Aye.
Dr. McIntyre.
Aye.
Mr. Mordomi.
Aye.
And Ms. Salazar Sperber.
Aye.
And Dr. Wong.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay. Now are you ready, Mr. Mordomi?
Sure. I'll do my best with backup from Jessica. So there are two major issues that the committee discussed. The first one being the review and update of the disciplinary guidelines. These guidelines, and we'll probably need to devote more time to the actual language of the guidelines at another meeting, is the board's way of informing or almost directing staff and the ALJs as to the level of discipline that we expect to be imposed on violators of our law, depending on which violation we're talking about. You know, fraud versus failing to fill out the CE form correctly. So I think we'll need to take time in looking at each of the guidelines for each of the violations. One area of discussion that we had that the board will need to also discuss is the idea of the minimum amount of suspension, minimum amount of days of suspension. So under the guidelines, there's required discipline, and then there's discipline if warranted. And for under the current guidelines, many of the if warranted penalties include suspension of 30 days. So if suspension is warranted, the guidelines say you have to impose 30 days worth of discipline. The suggested changes are to eliminate, for many of the violations, the 30-day requirement. So an ALJ can decide if suspension is warranted to suspend 1 day, for example. I think the board needs to discuss that because depending on the violation, the board may want to say, well, if suspension is warranted for this particular violation, we believe that 30 days is the minimum amount of suspension time. Or we want to give the LJs and staff more flexibility and not specify a minimum amount of suspension. The other topic we'll need to disclose is as we enforce continuing education more, what guidelines in terms of penalties we want to signal to the staff and the ALJs when someone misfills out their CE disclosure, right? How severe should that penalty be? So that's the other thing we should discuss. There's lots of cleanup language. Jessica, do you want to say anything more about the disciplinary guidelines?
I think just really highlighting the need to break out the potential discipline and recommended probation terms for those who fail the CE audits. Right now, those who fail the CE audits, in order for them to renew, they've self-certified that they've done the CE. And in cases that rise to the level of an accusation, it's typically an egregious amount that they did not do. which is why it's rising to that level. The others that where it's less, we can either do an educational letter and have them prove that they've now complied, or we issue a citation in order for them to comply with the CE. But in the cases where it's an egregious violation, they just didn't do it, then right now the guidelines are saying that with those, you're looking at violations of 3106, 3110A, and 3110E. 3110 is unprofessional conduct, and 3106 is the misleading information, an act of dishonesty. And right now, those violations would trigger not only the standard conditions, but you're looking at remedial education, you're looking at an audit, so a billing audit required, and medical record keeping course. And as you can tell from the CE audit, when that's the reason for discipline, requiring an audit and requiring medical record keeping course and even remedial education doesn't really get to the issue of why they're being disciplined. And it could be viewed as somewhat punitive because it really doesn't apply to the violation. And so staff is recommending that instead of applying those, and to have, if they do a CE audit failure, which is on page 2 of the report, then to recommend the required conditions be the 1 through 16 standard terms, and then 38, which is the continuing education, so to be compliant with that. And then potentially, if warranted, it would be a discussion of, do you want to suspend this individual until they prove the CE, and what that looks like. But that's really the issue that we're facing right now with the audit, because we're seeing a lot higher failure rate than we had anticipated right now.
The other segment of discussion was, we began discussing the inspection plan, and we had a working group look at that. One of the topics of discussion, I'm not sure how we would resolve this, we may require further discussion either at the committee level or for the board, is whether the inspections are complaint driven or done by random sampling. I know there's a considerable amount of public interest on that discussion. We have not come to a recommendation or resolution. But that's going to require further discussion. The people who are on that working group, do you want to say anything else about that? No?
No, but I just want to, once again, once we're done with this committee working on these guidelines, this is going to merge with, or is it going to be separate from the RTOs that we're doing?
They're going to remain separate documents.
Okay.
But as far as the uniform standards, because the DOC is also looking at creating their disciplinary guidelines. And I think the one document that probably will still be the same as the uniform standard document, because we're talking about separating them. But the DOC is also looking at applying the uniform standards differently than how optometry is applying the uniform standards. So that's also going to be a subject of discussion to if the board would like to do what the committee is doing or keep how they're applying their uniform standards. But that's a separate issue than the inspection program right now.
So then a question on the path forward, because there are very important issues that are raised here that will take some time to work through. What are you both recommending as the path forward to tackling each of these, or?
So the disciplinary guidelines, I think we want to send it up to the board for full discussion.
Okay.
And then for the inspection, just go with the
I think right now we would like a determination from the board of how it would like to proceed with the inspections, whether we're looking at a routine inspection program or if we're looking at a complaint-driven program. I think one of the clarifications I'd like to offer is in the past when we were talking about really routine-driven inspections, it was called the proactive method. I want to clarify that the complaint-driven ones are also somewhat proactive, and it enables the board to where if we are investigating something or say we see something, we are not prohibited from opening a complaint. So we can be proactive and still go out and inspect using the complaint-driven model, and the routine inspections don't provide necessarily a reason for it other than the fact that everybody knows that at some point the board is going to go out and inspect. I think that was a point that Dr. Kawaguchi had made at one point when we looked at the data of the other programs, because they spent a lot of resources and money during their inspection program, but there was very little action that was taken as a result. So there was a question: is it because it's not necessary and you're overdoing it, or is it because the boards know, or the industry knows that the board could go out there at any time, and that's why they're compliant? So it's really a policy call of the board of what direction you want to do with the inspection program. I know that stakeholders had raised some concerns about a routine-driven inspection program too.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Can you talk a little bit about staff who would be assigned to one or both if we did a hybrid model? What positions do we currently have? Would this require reframing job descriptions?
No, so I think, and it really depends on what avenue we go to. And that was also a discussion of the committee of who we would use as inspectors. I think the committee had recommended first to look at the tools that inspectors would use to see if it would need to be an optometrist or if it can be anyone outside who is not a professional member. And if that's the case, we can either utilize D of I to go out and do the inspections for us, or we can do subject matter expert contracts for them to go out, and we can keep their area tied to that location, and do contracts, and that way we are only charged by the usage of that inspector.
So in my own mind, and I'm sorry I didn't send you a report earlier, I see it in 3 buckets. We have complaint-driven, where we get a consumer complaint. We have the random one where you kind of pull raffle balls out of the hopper and select. And then in the middle, I call it proactive, but what I mean by proactive are, so the issue you discussed earlier today about the notices, right? I put that in the proactive, in that we see that there's a problem and that there's no posting of these notices. So I would say that enforcement staff can decide to say, okay, well, let's do an inspection of all the optometrist office in Sacramento to see if there's posting. I mean, that's okay. I think we need to also recognize that a random inspection program, if we do a random inspection program, what are we inspecting for? I mean, if we're inspecting everything under the optometry law, that's a lot of work on our part, requires some special expertise, but I also recognize the intrusiveness to a optometrist practice to, like, what do we look at? Files, what is it? So you need to, I don't want to be like the IRS if possible. I do recognize the value. There is some value of a random auditing program, because there's a deterrent effect. That even if you know there's only 1 in 100 chance that you're being audited, you're going to try to comply. But there are a lot of balances that we need to hear from the stakeholders and the community and balance. And it's going to cost us money to do it too, resources. So I don't know what the path forward is on this.
Yeah, and I'm just going to comment, we were going to also look at costs for each one of them.
So for today's action, is this an FYI? Did you want us to give you some kind of guidance somewhere? What would you like? And I just lost the internet connection.
Well, I think we just needed input from the board. It's like, what bucket do you think we ought to be
Prioritize?
Yeah, it's like, we just need opinions here. Because if we really think that the random method is way to go, we're gonna get better compliance and better consumer protection, then we need to start talking seriously about the costs associated with that. Is that something that we can do?
Or prioritize maybe for you, so then as you meet with Jessica, you are getting costs and workload estimates and et cetera, and you can't keep this moving forward to report back on one or both at the next board meeting, then we can help you focus in one direction or the other.
Okay, so then can we have a discussion or opinions from each of the board members? It's like,
Absolutely.
I mean, I think
where do you see this going?
Do we even have staff if we were to do random? Well,
It'd be outsourced.
but outsource.
Yeah.
And if we did proactive with a point driven, would that make it easier for staff if they need to inspect? It would kind of give them a,
You know, I think, as Jessica thinks that, the answer to that question, I'm not sure it's a question of which bucket we choose. I think it's a question of how many buckets we choose. Because certainly, if we get a consumer complaint and it requires an inspection, we're gonna do that,
Yeah.
right? Certainly, if we think there's rampant violations of a particular section of the Act, and we're not getting consumer complaints, we gotta do an inspection. So we're gonna do that.
but
Right.
would that fall under point driven or the proactive?
It would be, I call it proactive.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right, staff initiated. I guess the real question for us is, do we also, in addition to those two buckets, do we want to carry a third bucket that is random inspections? So we're gonna probably do the first two buckets, right, Jessica?
Yeah, and so I think because it's a new program from a staffing perspective, I'd like to try those first buckets first and see start tracking the inspections that we do as far as it pertains to a complaint, and then the proactiveness of our inspections, and then have that information and progress reported back to the board, and then discuss the need for a more routine random inspection program.
Do you have the capabilities to pilot this now?
Yeah, so we've done inspections now, this, more specifically tailored to the 655. So if we get for example, we get a complaint and the complainant says something to the effect of that's not really related to 655, or something like an advertising violation. They're advertising eye exams and they shouldn't be providing eye exams. While we can address that or if they don't have an F&P and they go and get their F&P, during the course of that investigation, we find that there's this relationship in there that seems like we need to now inspect that record, inspect the leases to make sure they're compliant with 655. So they're happening now.
And you had a question.
So, a consumer calls up with a complaint that Dr. So-and-so billed his insurance incorrectly and he ended up overpaying and Dr. So-and-so won't refund the money or something like that. What's the board gonna be doing as far as an inspection on that? Or as far as investigating it?
So with those, it's not so much of, well, I guess you can consider it inspections, because we receive those and we get the release from the patient record, or the patient to see those records, and we'll look at those. Based on what we find, we've issued subpoenas or warrants for the rest, random sample of other patient records to see if this is a problem and we can inspect that way. So we have been able to do that as well. We just haven't really called them inspections because it's an investigation. But it's.
So would that be, would something like that, could something like that at some point trigger a full investigation of that person's practice, where you're gonna go in, you're gonna check to make sure he or she did all of their CE. You're gonna make sure that they meet all the health and safety codes as far as having, hot running water. Going in and looking at their contact lenses and their drugs to be sure nothing's expired. Could something like that be a trigger for a full colonoscopy of their practice?
I don't know about that terminology, but
Well,
But
complete
it could,
colonoscopy
it
instead of full.
Colorful ones. today.
It could trigger more reason for an inspection.
Mr. Bordeaux, help us.
I'm sorry, David's comment is totally. Let me pass from it.
Why do you refer? Well, I have
So basically, you're saying we go forward for the moment doing exactly what we're already doing.
Right. And let us collect the data and report it back to the board.
Okay, so that the data that we need is not being collected then at this moment. What data we're trying to pull out of this exactly?
So I think right now, because we categorize it as a complaint and we track it in Breeze as such, we can change when we trigger an inspection because we want to see a lease, for example. Instead, it's a complaint type in the system, and we can change that complaint type to, instead of a complaint, we do a complaint type as inspections. So we can start gathering that.
Okay, so that hasn't been done yet.
Right.
So we can do that moving forward,
Correct.
see what we get, and, okay. But I guess, what is it we're looking for? What criteria are we trying to meet here to make us decide to go beyond that and go for that third bucket? So, yeah, we can gather data, but to what end?
Okay, so somewhat to address that, but also in general, we just got this inspection authority, so let's see how it plays out in the complaint-driven and what I call proactive. I kind of want to see, going back to another agenda item, how this issue of not posting the notices goes. I mean, we've identified it as a probable issue. We're working with the regulated community to get the word out to address it. I mean, if that works, then that's a good example, right? I mean, if we are spotting issues where there's rampant or, kind of lots of violations that need kind of inspection for, then maybe we can talk about a random inspection program. I mean, that's kind of our next step. If enforcement and compliance is a real problem. I get it that the random inspection, it's a big step because we need to gear up with the subject matter experts to do that inspection. So.
And maybe it's starting, to your point, start small, whatever the 5 or 6 trigger points are, and we see that if they fail 5 of 6 or all 6, then maybe that is the catalyst. But just to go in and say, hi, I'm here and I'm going to camp out for a day, I think legal will be getting a lot of phone calls. I'm looking at you. And it might be.
Right. I mean, there are instances where we need to do an inspection to address David's point. I mean, if someone says that, someone's facilities is a hot mess, we can't get that information with a subpoena. We have to go and do an inspection.
Right, and
we do
meet with legal to make sure our bases are covered.
Yeah.
But just to walk in and say, I see A, B, and C, all right, I'm going to decide myself as an inspector that I'm going to shut this place down and inspect everything. We've got to be real careful with our span of control and make sure it follows a process that's regulated.
Question for Mina. As far as a complete inspection of a practice, an entity like VSP does that in most practices every few years. IMED does it. State agencies like Medi-Cal do it on occasion. Is there any way that a non-state agency like VSP can communicate with the board saying this person had such and such violations, they didn't have running water, they're using expired drugs, they're reselling frames, anything like that?
Sure, they're willing to provide that information. That could be, it could be a complaint and a referral.
I mean, and that way you're more directed at a specific type of issue. And because they're going to do an all-day look-see at the office. But there's no way to compel them to do that, is there? It would
No.
have to be completely voluntary.
And they're unlikely to do that
Yeah.
And they audit your charts.
because of the exposure that I would put them at.
Right. Which leads me back to what's legal.
So another item as part of the inspection program, which Mark reminded me about, is really to the education portion of it. The committee had discussed what tools the inspector is going to use, and they had looked at the current worksite monitoring plan that the board had approved in 2013. And in that, it has a pretty comprehensive plan of what a worksite is going to look for in that practice. And that also includes, for example, the infection control guideline checklist, which was essentially a copy and paste from existing law and had check boxes marked to them. There were comments from the professional members that they are willing to bet that most of the profession aren't even aware of those infection control guidelines. And I think that the ask of the Public Relations and Outreach Committee and the associations is to really do more education to let them know that this is something that is in law and you should be following, similar to the consumer notice. And that way we put the word out there and educate and then start the inspections to making sure those are followed.
So is there any way that we can just sort of tag that on as a, oh, I've read this during my license renewal process? So, it's part of the whole license renewal, you have to click on and it's just part of your packet.
So it depends on how you kind of roll it into the renewal cycle. If you make it a condition of renewal, that's going to be a statutory change for renewal. And it's what happens if they don't answer the question. Are you legally able to hold up a renewal for not doing that? Because we don't hold up a renewal for a conviction just because they had a conviction, because they have due process rights. So I see some concerns with tying it to the renewal.
What about,
Okay.
I was gonna say, what about, since we can't tie it by statute, what about it's recommended that the licensee review the file, just putting something in there that this actually exists, might benefit you to look at it.
And that you have authority to inspect, so
Just announcing that.
announcing
I
that.
don't know that everybody knows that now.
Right.
That could act as a deterrent to your.
I was going to say, or echo David's thoughts. I mean, in this age of online whatever, it could be a click through, right?
Correct.
Oh, as you're completing the application for renewal, workplace, whatever we say, and then you can hit next if you want to, but it's there.
Yeah.
I'm hearing a little bit of a consensus on this issue. I'm thinking about making a motion saying that on the issue of random inspection, that we defer it for a year and then have staff bring it up next year to give us a report about how the other inspection pieces are going, the complaint driven and the what I call proactive.
So you're thinking about making that motion, or you're going?
I've seen people nod their heads, so I'm making a motion.
Okay. All right, discussion. So,
Yeah, I just have a question. These random inspections, does it apply, let's say, in an RTO location to the where they're dispensing and selling the glasses and contacts, or does this apply to the independent doctor?
I mean, there's no details right now.
No,
But,
we don't know who it applies to.
No, the authority applies across.
Across the board
So
inspection, so
everyone.
everybody would be subject to inspection.
If,
And they are now.
Yeah, because sometimes the RDO is separate than the doctor.
Correct.
So if the RDO will also be included in there.
Correct.
Dr. McIntyre, did you have any other comments based on this motion? No. Okay.
That you answered my question.
Okay. Ms. Mitchell, Dr. Trensky?
No.
Dr. Wong? Dr. Kawaguchi is
No.
grabbing water. Ms. Salazar Sperber?
No.
Okay, we'll go ahead. And any public comment? I know, I looked right away.
See, there's
I know. There we go.
Kara Corches on behalf of the California Optometric Association. This more tempered approach that you're moving forward with today alleviates our concerns. Our concerns were mainly just on enacting some type of percentage-based inspection program. that probably just doesn't, weigh out when you look at the cost versus the benefit. We saw the data from the dental board and the vet board where they're handling more bloodborne pathogens, sorry, I can't say that right, and surgical procedures where optometry scope is pretty non-invasive. So I think this more tempered approach really alleviates our concerns, and I think it's wise to study it for a year and collect that data. And the third piece I want to bring up is the educational component is critical. So we've seen with the board recently put out information about the posting notification. We've put that out as well as to our members, and a lot of members just, you don't know what you don't know. There's a lot to running a business in optometric practice. You're constantly getting emails and insurance, notifications. So I think that educational piece is critical, and we would be happy to share that and really push that out to our members as well to make sure your inspection program is, successful and well received by the optometrist statewide. Thank you.
Thank you. That helps. Okay, now.
Okay, Ms. Brandbein.
Aye.
Dr. Transcripts.
Aye.
Ms. Michelin, aye. Ms. Garcia.
Aye.
Dr. Carducci.
Aye.
Dr. McIntyre.
Aye.
Mr. Moradani. Aye. Ms. Salazar Sperber.
Aye.
And Dr. Wong.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay. Next committee, classes, practice and education. Who's speaking on their behalf?
So I'll go ahead and just give a quick update. This is, they met twice in March to look at courses. I gave you a little bit of statistics. They reviewed 39 courses, 35 were approved, 4 were returned for additional information. They received, and this is as of April 11th, they had 35 additional applications. And since then, I think it's up to closer to 45 that they receive because they come in bulk. So they're going to need to have a meeting in early May again to address the flux. So look forward to that.
Thanks, Jessica.
Quick question I've asked this, I just want to be sure I've got this right. So I attend a continuing medical education category or category 1. I don't have to send that certificate to the board to approve it, do I? As long as it's approved by the CME council, I'm good?
Correct, yeah. So anything under 1536 that has the flat approval, there's several categories in there. We don't need to see it. It's only when it doesn't fall under that and the providers are wanting the board to approve it.
Got it. Thank you.
Is it easy for licensees to get information that just clarifies what you just clarified?
I think there is an opportunity for improvement on the information submitted to them. I think right now it's not a quick thing that they can go to our website, but we can include it in our newsletter and to our FAQs, which should be posted to our website shortly as well.
Do we give the people who are, do they get like an approval number? I mean, I know we approve them.
The providers get an approval number.
And so then that's what's posted on the C certificate.
Correct.
Okay, any questions of the Practice and Education Committee? Let's do a quick glance down the road. All right, thank you. Legend Reg.
Okay, so I'm not gonna read the whole item, but there are 3 things that we're looking for. One is the recommendations on the mobile clinic, which I'll get to. We'll go to agenda item 10 and discuss amending, should sponsor legislation to amend Business and Professions Code. And then the third is looking at, we did not, at the time we had our Leg Reg committee, most of the bills were just being introduced. So we did not take positions on a number of pieces of legislation. So we can either go through that or whatever the will is. The big issue is the mobile clinic as part of this report. We had a meeting, we included the stakeholders. There's a lot of lively discussion about mobile clinics. There are really, as we've mentioned before, 2 pieces to this. One is the homebound care piece, which is pretty close to being finished in terms of our recommendations, and then what the head of is for profit, whatever.
It's a
Convenience, whatever you want to call it, for profit business model, which that is a little bit more contentious. Both require taking legislation we can't sponsor any legislation until January, February of 2019, so we still have plenty of time to do anything. What the recommendation is to look at the amendments that are included here, and this is pertaining to homebound care only. And if we can get this piece done and kind of finished, then we'll put that aside, and then we'll spend the rest of the time focused on the other side of it, so that we can put together one comprehensive piece recommendation of proposed language to shop around once we have the new legislative session.
And I think we had also said that if we can't get the second half completed, we could at least propose the homebound part in the 2015 legislative session.
We can, the only thing I would say on that part piece is that then we would basically have to take, at least from my perspective, you know, you need someone who's gonna run this legislation. And if you only wanna do one piece, that's great, then maybe someone else on the board can take on that piece of the homebound care. Because, you know, or we push off the for-profit piece until another legislative session. I think you either do it complete, you do the homebound care and not do the other, or, you know, I think does that make sense? But am I making sense?
But the part for the homebound care is pretty much, like after talking with all stakeholders, it's pretty much, we might need to massage the language a little bit, but I thought it was pretty much done, so if we could at least get that.
I'm gonna give you some advice. I thought children's vision was pretty much all together, and you have no idea until you actually introduce legislation who will oppose it, and it becomes a scope battle. And so my point, all I'm saying is it's perfectly fine doing it this way. It's just gonna mean, I'm saying from a personal perspective, someone else on the board is gonna have to lead this piece of legislation, because I don't have the bandwidth to do that, and we're gonna have children's vision next year, which will be a huge scope battle, and from my perspective, that is my first priority before this. So that's all, I'm just being honest with all of you that I'm more than happy to do what I can, but if we're gonna piecemeal the mobile clinic issue, other board members are gonna have to step up, and they're gonna have to be at the Capitol, do committee hearings, meet with legislators on the issue. Dr. Calgucci and I will have our hands full next year on the children's vision issue.
Well, I just think we just have to look, I guess, at the whole picture. Having worked on the mobile clinics for the last 3 years, I think really focusing the last year, it took a lot of effort over the last 2 years just to get what we have for this really small part of mobile clinics. And if we're gonna talk about using mobile clinics for children's vision, if we're gonna talk about mobile clinics for convenience factors, that's a much bigger piece of the pie. And finding language for that we're going to agree on in the next 6-7 months, I think is being optimistic. I mean, I would love the fact that if we could have one big bill, it'd be great. Just having worked on the homebound part, it's taking a lot of work and a lot of hours just to get that section done. So I'm not optimistic that we'll have a really.
And that's fine. All I'm saying is that I say absolutely, if we get the homebound stuff baked and ready to go, the board should absolutely introduce legislation, but someone else on the board is gonna have to run that legislation, because I won't be able to be involved in it, because I'm gonna be focused on children's vision.
So that's fair, I mean, let's take it as a given, but, we have a few months. I think the discussion at the board was, if we can try to make an omnibus in the next few months to do so, it's always a kind of strategic discussion. Do we want to go with a larger bill with pieces that we can jettison off during the legislative process, but then that's going to take a lot of time, a lot of work, or do we want something that may appear to be a little bit more streamlined, that may have a greater opportunity to get passed sooner? So we're weighing those two. Weigh those two options. And I granted, the legislative processes, who knows what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So it's really how many eggs do we put in our basket?
So my recommendation is that I think it's better to go broader and whittle it down, because you go broad and you have to have room to compromise regardless. So what I would like to do is have the board to approve the homebound stuff so that we can check that box and we have that. And then have the, whether it's the ledge reg or if whatever the president wants to do on a work group, work with the stakeholders on getting legislation so that we can have a bill that is a complete bill pertaining to mobile clinic. And we have language to introduce in January of 2019.
So I guess, when do we have to make the decision if it's going to be?
January of 2019. So we have plenty of time. And if we can't come up with something between now and January and get stakeholders and negotiate something with stakeholders, then it's probably never going to happen.
So we could always make a decision at that point to not include the more global mobile clinic.
Yeah.
And just stay with.
You stay with homebound, and then someone else on the board can lead the charge on the homebound care.
But it keeps our motion going,
Correct.
right, of discussion.
So it's just getting one piece of it done. The homebound will be done, so we don't have to deal with that. So people who could care less about the for-profit stuff, they don't need to participate should they choose not to in the stakeholder, because we're not going to be talking about homebound care because that piece is already finished.
Is it worth doing something, since homebound care seems like it'll probably be a pretty easy haul in comparison to a global issue? Is it worth getting the homebound care in, seeing how that functions for a year or two, and then seeing if you could expand it to a more open system with the for-profit type of issue?
I think if you start opening up the different worms with homebound care, you're gonna get other, and remember, we could say we're only gonna focus on homebound care. It goes before a committee and people are lobbying and they're saying, well, you're being discriminatory towards for-profit, and they could amend the bill and we have zero say in how that process goes. So if we wanna be the leader behind this, and we wanna really be the ones that are taking the lead on putting this together, we're better off doing it all at one time.
Any other comments from board members? Because I'd like to hear from the public on this. Dr. Long or Dr. Calgucci? No? Ms. Salazar-Sperber? Comments from the public?
Here, of course, we have the California Optometric Association. So COA was involved in all of the homebound care work groups, and we did indeed come up with a product that's very close to being kind of ready for prime time. COA's historical position is opposed for, I don't know what you want to call it, either convenience or for-profit mobile clinics. And also just a word of caution, this is opening Pandora's box when we touch mobile clinics. As we saw, I think 2 years ago, you guys met in the Capitol to address this issue, and we couldn't really even get past the initial definition of what a mobile clinic is. So just kind of a word of caution about opening up this box altogether. But I did appreciate the time that we just spent with the work group and the homebound care issue. I don't have a position or authorized to say whether we would support just going, with the homebound care through legislation versus just heating off and waiting until the whole package is addressed. But we are going to have major concerns if the for-profit side is brought into the equation. Thank you.
So that sounds to me biased, if it's a package that includes homebound care, which you supported, and convenience care, you would sink that whole ship. I shouldn't say put it that way. You'd be opposed to that package.
Yeah, I can't say as a lobbyist that we're going to sink the whole ship,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Sorry.
Yes, I think we would, be supportive and willing to work on the homebound care issue, but we are going to have strong opposition to opening up the, for-profit convenience debate. Thank you.
All right, any other comments? How about a motion then? Or what are you hoping to take away from this?
Well, I think we recommend that we accept the language for the homebound care, and we continue to work on the for-profit with the caveat that we have until January of 2019. I mean, really, in theory, from a timing, we should have this on the agenda to have a decision at the November board meeting. And then by that point, we either yay or nay on how we move forward with it. So between now and November, have, if you wanna do a work group, but I mean, the work group's gonna have to be meeting very regularly in order to get something together by that timeline.
Okay, well, I'm looking at both my heads lying between the two work group committee members, work group members. What are your thoughts?
Well,
Since you're being tasked.
I was part of the committee discussion and I voted in favor of the recommendation.
Okay,
So I'm okay with it.
all right. So we have a recommendation, but I believe, do we need to vote on it? Yeah, that's
So
what
we
I
have
thought.
to vote to accept the language for the homebound.
Well, I'm looking for a motion.
I move the motion, I move that we accept the language for the homebound care.
I'll second the motion.
Okay. Public comment? Once, twice, we already heard, I know, but I'm just, lighting my P's and Q's. Okay, Rachel, you're on.
Ms. Brandon.
Wait, sorry, I'm sorry. Can I just
Yes.
say I'd like to look at it carefully and make sure with the intent that's there, not change anything substantively, but if I need to add a word here and there.
You have not looked at
I have, but I want to make sure that,
Well, my
When we
guess is
actually-
it will come up again in November, whenever we decide to actually move forward with it.
So you're using this as guidance, or we're voting to accept
you're
as
voting to
is?
accept it with the caveat that I might have a legal
Okay,
fix.
okay.
You always have that right.
And
Thank
so
you.
that's the friendly amendment, and Rachel, do you accept the friendly amendment?
Sure.
All right. So the motion is to accept with legal taking a cursory secondary review, okay. All right.
All right, Ms. Brandvine.
Aye.
Dr. Turetsky.
Aye.
Ms. Michelin, aye. Ms. Garcia.
Aye.
Dr. Kawaguchi.
Aye.
Dr. McIntyre.
Aye.
Mr. Murdock. Aye. Ms. Salazar Sperber.
Aye.
Dr. Wong.
Aye.
Motion carries. I'll skip, then I think the only other thing to add that's not in the report, I don't think it's anywhere, is children's vision.
It's under agenda item 9.
Okay, then this item's done. Right?
Thank you. All right. Item number 9.
Oh, no.
Hey,
No.
Ruby.
Oh,
Yeah.
Ruby, so
Okay.
I'm sorry. I didn't see the link.
Okay. We had a great discussion yesterday. I thought it worked really well. And Jessica presented the renewal process. We were very excited about that, how they'll go in there and get their renewals, provided that they have their fingerprint there. We had a really good long discussion with Jim Morris, who comes from the American Board of Opticianry, because we're concerned about the passing rates, the failing rates. They're not 50%, they're passing. And he introduced what's going on as far as testing that they're putting on their website. He talked to us about helping us, because we're also looking to communicate, do outreach to our opticians, and he has at least offered to provide email to see who has passed, and he's going to help us with that. So we still cannot conclude whether, as far as scope of practice, is that exam testing for scope of practice. So we're still talking about the occupational analysis, and that'll help us determine whether it's meeting the scope of practice. We had such a long discussion about that we had maybe, 10, 15 minutes to talk about disciplinary guidelines. We're going to continue to do that.
So, and a question for you, 50% is.
Yeah, what was it, 50 or 55%? Yeah, it's very.
That's national and it's lower in California. But when you look
It's
at
lower in California, did
Yeah.
you just say?
correct, and it was something that the legislature looked at during sunset review. And is it really a concern, or is it a result of other requirements or prerequisites to take that exam? So the reason Jim Morris offered to come down is to really explain what goes on in the exam, and also to demonstrate all the tools available to those who want to take the exam. And after going through all of that, because it's pretty substantial information that they have available to them, they have practice tests available to them, a lot of study guides available to them, and he demonstrated a lot of that to the committee. And they decided from what they've seen so far, they don't have concerns about the passing rates because it appears to be, if you really study that, anybody should be able to pass it. So if they're not passing it, they're really not putting in the time to study for it. And so it's not necessarily a concern. However, so they did request that staff stop devoting time to this item because they've spent several meetings discussing this at length. And so the recommendation to staff was to right now there's no concerns, but the caveat being we're going to proceed with the OAs of both exams, the occupational analysis and Lincoln study. And if they flag anything that is of concern, then to bring that back up to the committee and then address that should it come up.
And just one other important, Jim Morris agreed that upon passing their exam, in the certificate they mail out, they're going to put this letter that says, congratulations, just to summarize, you passed, but you still have to reach out to the Board of Optometry to get a registration. There's a lot of confusion. They are under the impression if they pass, they're good to go, they can work. They're registered in California. And when it comes to renewal, they also realize, well, I renewed it with the American Board of Opticianry, so I'm good to go, I should be practicing. So that letter is going to go out just to flag all of them. You need to still apply with the Board of Optometry.
Is the language going to be really clear so
Very
that
clear.
there's a clear understanding of the difference between a certificate?
Yes. And I have a copy of the letter here in case you want to see it.
It's also on the DOC's meeting agenda materials. The copy of the letter is in there. And that's been vetted through stakeholders and legal counsel as well.
Just as a one-off, I mean, we don't have CLE for CEs for, right, so this is really the only one shot that anybody tests their competency, right?
Correct.
So,
For now.
right, so I'm not so concerned about the low passage rate because it's the only, we need to check their competency.
Ruby, will your course be tracking the graduates? Because I would assume after they have formal training, you should have a pass rate well into the 90s.
Absolutely. We got help from the opticianry programs in the East Coast who've been open maybe 20, 40 years. We're following what they're teaching, and we are looking at it'll be a 97, 99% passing rate. And that's going to start showing other opticians, if you get formal training, this is what you're going to get, plus more. You're going to get a lot more recognition and perhaps better jobs. I should say perhaps definitely better jobs because you now have a degree. And it's also a way for them to pursue, they want to be optometrists. They've got to go and get a bachelor's and still get ready to go into optometry school. And we're getting great support from doctors with Moore Park Community College. Are coming in, speaking to the students, and the students are excited about it. So that's a solution that I'm sure is going to grow, and it has been growing. We have more students applying. I just was amazed. It's already growing.
Okay. Any other comments on the doc meeting from the public? All right, now we're done with the committee meetings. All right, agenda item number 9, and we'll be picking and choosing which ones.
Yeah, so the intent, members, is not for the board to go through these one by one. It's really to show what we are monitoring as they go through the process. By the time that these were posted, a lot of them didn't even have analysis posted because it's pretty early in. But there are some changes that we want to go over. But just know, members, if some of these bills, if they change, and they can, as you know, change very quickly, and if we feel a strong enough concern that the board needs to take an action on, we're going to recommend to have a special meeting. And as a reminder, we need 6 as a quorum. So if you see those emails in the next few months, please respond timely so we can get a meeting on calendar to take a position on a bill. With that, there are a couple, AB 1802 is going to be a scope bill right now. There's no language in there. I know that COA is working with opposition on language, but there's nothing there yet, so I don't recommend a position because there's not much in print. I do want to let Rachel and Dr. Kawaguchi give an update on AB 244. I believe provided an update a few weeks ago on what's occurred since then, and go ahead and open up to Rachel.
Oh, children's vision. So children's vision is now a scope bill, scope of practice. Don't really understand why. Unfortunately, the California Medical Association and Kaiser have decided that we are somehow trying to make a scope of practice run against them. I don't understand how putting a form in a packet, making kids and parents aware of the importance of a comprehensive eye exam has anything to do with the scope bill, considering we're not even saying specifically you have to see an optometrist, that you can go see an ophthalmologist or a pediatrician should they give a comprehensive eye exam. But that's what they've done. So given that this is a short period, with introducing the bill in January, it really speeds up the process. You only have until, I don't know when the House of Origin deadline is it in March or April? May. So it would be a huge lift to try to get this through this short period of time. So we've talked with the Assemblywoman's office. Both Dr. Kawaguchi and I are 125, if not 150 now % committed to seeing this through. And we will be coming up with some strategies with some of our other partners on this issue on how to address it. But I do want to caution all of you that you all will be called on next year to have to help us. A scope battle is not an easy battle at all. And we're going to need every board member's help in talking to your legislators and talking to other legislators, in helping us really do a PR campaign around why this is important. But that's kind of where we're at right now. We're like the little engine of it, though. We're going to eventually get there towards the end.
Will you be providing talking points for those who perhaps have not visited their legislators?
We will, and we can do advocacy training if you like. I will say that I don't know what the bill will be, because at this point, maybe we may go back to what we wanted it before. I mean, we have tried. What I think the frustrating part for us, for Dr. Kawaguchi, I'm speaking for Dr. Kawaguchi, was that, we did everything we could. We had stakeholder meetings, we met with the opposition, we tried to, this bill became just a pilot project in 2 school districts. We took in everything that they wanted us to do and tried to work with them, and we realized there's nothing we can do. They will oppose this regardless, for whatever reason. So we need to circle back. We need to sit down and figure out exactly what we want to do. Do we go back to how we had it before, which was SB, I don't remember what that bill number was, 402, and go back to where it was much more comprehensive and bigger, and we just go back to that, knowing that, we're never going to get them to try to compromise with us. I don't know if there's any, I know Dr. Kawaguchi, if you want to pipe in. Nope.
Stay away from that one.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's any questions.
I mean, this simply sounds like a tactic to kill it.
Right.
Kill what? Oh, they don't want, for whatever reason, I don't understand, because quite frankly, they don't, from our research, VSP and IMED cover more children. Kaiser is definitely the one that is opposing the bill, and they are using the California Medical Association as their cover, but they are the ones that are opposing it.
I have a question. I know we also have an education board.
State Board of Ed.
Right.
Mhm.
Have you ever talked to them about this?
We certainly, that may be an option.
That's what I think.
All
because
things are on the table.
They've got something, I'm sure that there'll be people meeting them there too, but do they have an influence that could help this?
I mean, you could try to do regulation. The big issue though too is it really becomes an issue about the children who are really suffering are underserved children. They're in the minority communities, they're in the lower income communities. They're the ones that are truly suffering, and they are the ones that are going to perform poorly in school. And so, we have to do a better job of communicating that and getting other groups to support this legislation, that thinking outside the box. And really now we know we're going in with a fight. I mean, this is a fight. But I agree, I have that.
Yeah, I think it would be something
interesting.
just to ask,
Mhm.
what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely.
And we can go into their meetings as a public member, right, and talk.
Yeah.
I'd be willing to do that.
I was just gonna say, we can volunteer.
I know.
I'd be willing to go in and just bring it up to them.
Yeah.
Maybe work with Rachel then and
Right.
start
All of
the talking points.
Yeah.
When they have their next meeting, I'd like to do that.
Yeah.
We can go to school off of that.
After next week.
And they did participate in one of the meetings with Burke's office, and they are wanting to be engaged in the conversations, and they were open to it. So I think that would be good.
I'll definitely do that. Thank you.
Kara, on behalf of the Optometric Association, will go out of order because to address Ruby's comment, we will have a new superintendent of instruction next year. So I think that will be a good opportunity after the elections to introduce our cause. I just wanted to say thank you for bringing up this issue again. This is one of our organization's priority issues voted on by our entire membership at our House of Delegates, that they want COA to keep working on this. It was a really disappointing loss, of course, but I did want to thank Rachel, Dr. Kawaguchi, Todd, and Jessica. I think we all worked really well as a team, and I know COA and the board isn't always on the same side of issues, but it's really nice to be on the same side and to go in at this together. I will already commit to you that we are going to stand by you and work. If you are willing to bring this up again, we will be your partner in this, and I think there's a lot of groundwork that needs to be done, though, between now and January, and a lot of times we get busy and things happen in the fall, but we have to really stay dedicated. I have spoken with the BSP. Their executives mentioned that they have a school program in Sacramento where every child gets an eye exam by BSP, and they'd be willing to share some of that data. Perhaps we could kind of come in as our own mini study in the interim. I also wanted to give some kudos to Jessica, because in our meeting with stakeholders, it was very contentious and a lot of pretty harsh accusations were thrown, and she handled it with grace and stood her ground, though, at the same time, which is really impressive. But I look forward to continuing this next year, and hopefully we'll get it much farther and signed by the governor. Thank you.
Project plans. We're tasking out milestones, responsibilities, raising.
No, and that's putting way too much logic for the legislative process. That, I get where you're going, but.
For us.
But I think even for us, it would be hard to do, because it's such a fluid kind of thing that it's gonna be,
And I think we tried. We tried to have all these different things and different groups to reach out to, but then we would get just a bomb thrown our way, and yeah.
the good news is, this is our third go around, so we've heard, I think, every single argument against it, from terrorism to,
Don't challenge them.
I know, to that this is gonna traumatize children. So now we've heard everything. I don't know what else they can throw at us. So in a way, we kind of know what we need to expect and how to strategize to go forward. So, and I do want to thank Kara. I mean, Kara has worked her tail off on this issue, and really appreciate everything with data and all kinds of handouts and things like that. So thank you so much for that.
Experts that you brought to the table too, thank you.
Yes.
Well, hopefully we'll have more success.
I promise not to start a Twitter war, but perhaps offline you can tell me what the accusations have been made against this board.
Well, you don't have solid arguments to make on opposing something other than maybe your own profit margin, then all kinds of things come out. So that's total vision. Oh, wait, I have one other question. Are we still then gonna do the frame?
The frame game?
Yeah,
Yeah, so it was slated for back to school to really push that campaign, and so since we're not gonna use it for the bill, DCA recommended that we start it during the back to school so we don't lose momentum when we roll it out. So we're still proceeding with that.
so does everyone know what that is, the frame, was it frame game?
Show off your frame
Show
game.
off your frame game. So basically, all of you with your glasses, we want you to take pictures and post it, take pictures of kids, if you know kids are wearing glasses, and just really kind of, talk about the importance. I think one way to incorporate personal stories of how, I didn't know I didn't see until I was 14. We want to catch some of those stories so that we can show why it's important for these kids to get these exams early.
There are a lot of patients come to us with those stories.
So see if you can start capturing them.
I could get
Yeah,
With a picture.
with a picture.
They're willing to speak. They already told me they'd like to come to board park and speak to the students. They're willing to speak.
But you know what we should get? Is there Nina, don't we have to, if she would take pictures of like kids, a release form? Do we have a release form?
They're probably gonna, DCA's probably.
Yeah, if I can have that.
So maybe you can email it to all of us, that way if everyone is out there and doing stuff, we can remember to get a release form signed.
And if I recall, wasn't there a celebrity who was going to sponsor this or something? It was.
No, we're trying to get someone.
To get some YouTubers.
We need
entertain
YouTubers.
YouTubers.
Oh, YouTubers!
Hello.
Hello! See? We need some YouTube, I don't know who.
You know that company, I forget who the YouTubers.
I'll have to ask my daughter, who they are, who the ones are, because I have no idea who they are.
Okay.
And I know there's some because my younger daughter watches some family on YouTube, and she even said, "Mommy, look, they went to get an eye exam like I did." They did it on YouTube. So, yeah, YouTube. You have the power, Sid.
All of you do. It's all about those who post to YouTube.
Yeah, well.
So
Maybe the board needs to post something on.
Do we have a
Instagram
YouTube
to
channel?
YouTube. Do we have a,
do we have a YouTube? DCA has a YouTube channel, and that's where all our board meetings, their websites are.
No, we're talking about a hip
Yeah.
YouTube channel. The young people would go to see that glasses and frames.
And it can't be Board of Optometry, we have to come up with a cute name or something.
So I'll get on trying
Yeah,
to
like Frank, that's
find
okay.
a
You
hip
can do
YouTube
like the,
channel.
yeah.
I'm ready to
And then have young people and others start posting versus us post.
Right.
We could really make it a game.
Yeah. Up for prize, you get a VIP tour of the Capitol. Future legislator, they'll be all over that.
Exactly.
Come to a Board of Optometry. I'll give you an award.
No, we'll give you a comprehensive eye exam in the back of the room. Just kidding.
No, it's not approved yet.
I understand, the mobile clinic. Anything else? We're getting a little punchy here, Jessica.
Yeah, I know, I know. SB 1386, the board already discussed and took a motion on. There is one more piece of legislation that has recently been amended and has some concerns from legal. And so I've asked her to provide that update to the members.
So this is a department-wide, it's under C 2 AB 2138, and I think it's significant to spend just kind of a summary of it really is going to, if it's enacted, restrict your discretion with the enforcement process. So under current law, the board may deny a license or may take disciplinary action against a license if the applicant or licensee has a criminal conviction. So it doesn't have to, it's just an authorization that you may deny, you may take action. The caveat with the existing law is that the board cannot deny a license based solely on a criminal conviction if it was dismissed or the licensee was, the applicant, the conviction had been rehabilitated through the criminal system. Now, if this law goes into effect, there are significant changes, the lot more, less discretion. The board would be prohibited from denying, revoking, suspending a license on the grounds that an applicant had been convicted of a crime unless the conviction occurred in the past 5 years and has not been expunged. So you could only go back 5 years unless it's a violent crime. For example, murder, you could probably go back, as far back as necessary. But if it was past 5 years and it was fraud, excessive prescribing, you would be prohibited from taking disciplinary action and denying the license. Some other concerns, or I should just say the effect of it, is that the crime.
Sorry. Like try to turn my phone off. It's not working.
The crime to actually deny or take action, the crime must be, they're changing the standard for right now, you're used to hearing substantially related to the profession of being an optometrist. This would change that standard, which has developed a lot of case law under what that standard is, substantially related. Actually, you have regulations, the Optometry Board has regulations on what that means. That standard would be the crime must be directly and adversely related. And no one knows what that means at this point, but it sounds like a higher standard. You'd probably need to do regulations to define that further. The bill, if it became law, would also prohibit the board from requiring the applicant to disclose information about their criminal history, which is a big change. It would limit probationary terms to 2 years unless the board can provide clear and convincing evidence that there are additional terms or a longer amount of time that is necessary for protection of the public. It also would require the board to decide on a petition for modification or termination of probation within 90 days after the petition was filed. If the board did not make a decision, by default it would be granted. There's also reporting requirements that board staff would have to do to the legislature and on the website about which accusations or which denials were based on criminal convictions. So it's really shifting a lot of burdens, and it would take away a lot of the discretion. I know the contractors, state licensing board last Friday voted to oppose. I don't have information on whether other boards and bureaus, I know it's coming up at their meetings and they're looking at this right now, and I'm happy to follow up and find out what other boards and bureaus are actually taking positions on it. But I thought it's significant enough to raise it at this point.
I mean, if somebody's, so based on, I'm just looking at this here, violent felony is defined in section 667.5 of the penal code. If somebody's convicted of misdemeanor anything, but I'm thinking more in terms of, based on stuff that we've discussed before, exposing him or herself in front of kids or something like that, and the person's not convicted of a felony, and that's not necessarily even a violent felony, maybe it is a felony but not violent, that person could still be eligible if nothing's happened in the last 5 years?
If that conviction was, yes, 5 years prior to when they
So
applied.
they've done their prison time, they come out, and then we could theoretically have no choice but to essentially give this person a license.
Yes, I don't, then that doesn't qualify, I believe, as a violent. There is, rape that would be considered violent, murder, robbery, but I don't see.
Unless we have clear and convincing evidence that.
No, that it is both two requirements. It has to be within the preceding 5 years, and it has to be adversely and not substantially, it was adverse and directly related to the practice of your profession, however that's defined.
And then there's also the possibility if your statutes have some kind of bad conduct or unprofessional conduct or something that would encompass the underlying act, that could possibly be a basis for discipline, but the conviction itself would not be a basis for discipline, the fact that they were convicted.
So
And this is changing that,
Yeah.
so you can get these underlying facts.
So this, to me, the way it's coming across is protecting the licensee, especially a licensee who's broken the law, as opposed to protecting the consumer. And since our role is to protect consumers, I would make a motion that we formally oppose this legislation.
I would second that motion.
Okay, discussion amongst the board, Mr. Morrell.
So a couple things. Let me try to channel Bill Casella for a moment.
Okay.
I recall a number of times when we were discussing like some drunk driving convictions, Bill would say, this happened, you either say one of two things, and I can't get them straight. I'd say, this drunk driving happened 10 years ago, and they were driving to a baseball game, and now they're in these disciplinary proceedings with us and subject to losing their license. What does, getting pulled over after a baseball game have anything to do with the practice of optometry? So, I'm thinking of those conversations. I'm not necessarily sure I agree, but that is a perspective. There's also a movement out there that talks about, once you've been convicted of a crime and you've done your time, you should have an opportunity to get a job, right? Start over. And so the critique of the licensing system is that you get convicted of a crime, pay your time, and then your life is screwed because you can't practice a profession. So I'm wondering if that's part of that.
I appreciate that, but under the current law, the board is not prohibited from granting those people licenses or not taking disciplinary action.
But it takes the wherewithal to file a legal paperwork and go to the appeal. We saw this in our statement of issue. You gotta be smart enough to figure all
And
that
I
out.
think that is the discretion board staff has been given.
Yeah. So I'm playing actually more devil's advocate. The legislation raises a lot of issues. I think it's an overshoot of the problem. So I think I probably will support the motion, but I am mindful of the other kind of related issues.
And I want to also note that some of the changes that Nina spoke to have to do with applicants. So these aren't even people that are licensed and have some vested right in that license where they would go through a due process hearing. These are individuals who are not even licensed yet, and there's that potential for consumer protection being way less than their ability to obtain a license, not to maintain that.
Yeah, I get that, but I do recall the gentleman who was convicted of murder. And maybe that's not a good example, but he did go through a long process to get licensed. But anyway, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Is the AG's office allowed to take a position on things, or you just sit there and smile?
Personally, I just sit here and smile.
No, I mean, the AG Becerra, does his office take an opinion on these things?
I'm not sure that this has gone around to enough of the boards for there to be a position.
The status is, there's a committee hearing date for 24. So is that Tuesday? So it's it's an active bill in the committee process.
Is DCA taking a position?
I'm not aware of that they are.
And are there any kind of offerings of, well, we're okay with this if you amend this portion of it?
Not that I'm aware of it.
DCA is not gonna do it, that comes from the governor's office. The governor's office isn't gonna do it until it comes through the process.
So what about for us? Is there, as opposed to just this a simple oppose.
You can do oppose unless amended.
Should we leave the door slightly ajar so that we have that flexibility? Just a question.
You could do oppose unless amended.
But the only thing is we don't have suggested amendments.
I don't think you need
You don't need suggested amendments,
Just
right?
leave the door.
Yeah, they typically want amendments to know what the consent is.
I think you take oppose right now and then,
There's a lot that are raised, so you're
There's
essentially
a
looking at
couple
every
other things I
section.
didn't raise,
but
but
if you did oppose now and they make substantial changes in committee or whatever,
then they come back.
then we can have
Have a new
we can
position.
reconsider the new position.
Dr. Wong?
Yeah,
We're in, can't Dr. Kawaguchi anymore. Okay, Ms. Salazar Sperber. Okay. So we're gonna go ahead and take public comment. We're gonna take a vote, and we're gonna take a 10-minute break. So, public comment? Looking behind. Sorry, I'm sorry. Okay, thank you. All right.
Ms. Brandwein.
Aye.
Dr. Tretzky.
Aye.
Ms. Kishore. Aye. Ms. Garcia.
Aye.
Dr. Kawaguchi.
Aye.
Dr. McIntyre.
Aye.
Mr. Moradami.
I'm Ms. Kane.
Ms. Salazar Sperber.
Aye.
And Dr. Wong.
Aye.
Motion carries.
10-minute break, please. We're back from break. Just a few housekeeping items. Agenda item number, I'm getting there, 12. We are going to hold over till the next meeting on the board member handbook. And now we'll finish up with anything more on 9 that you wanted to cover. All right, thank you. So now we'll go to agenda item number 10.
Okay, so a quick recap of this. Members, as you recall, the board had initially discussed this in January and had decided to bring it to stakeholders and allow more time for discussion. This is surround around 3109 and the fact that optometrists can be employed by either other optometrists, ophthalmologists, or the healthcare service plans. And so there were some questions of if it would be better to remove that language that the medical doctor has to have a specialty in ophthalmology. And so the board had asked to discuss it with stakeholders. The committee, the Reg Committee met on the 23rd and discussed it with stakeholders and got some feedback. There wasn't a consensus reached or a recommendation on how to handle this issue, but they did want the board to discuss it again with stakeholders and decide, one, what they would like to do, and then priority-wise, if they would like to see a change in the statute, where do they want to prioritize it in the order of all the other stuff we're doing. So with that, Dr. Tretzky, if you want to add to that and open it up.
The reason that I originally brought this up, as you recall, is that it just seems silly. If other professions, any physician can work for any other physician, a physician can employ a dentist. We're the only children that need this special protection, that we can only work for an ophthalmologist. And in discussions with colleagues of mine, there are physicians, internists, who again, and this goes back to what we've been discussing with underserved areas, there's internists who would like to have an optometrist be in their practice maybe a couple days a month to screen for diabetic retinopathy in their patients, because there might not be readily accessible places to do that. One of my friends and a colleague works with folks who have ocular issues from traumatic brain injuries, and she has been asked to work in a neurological group and said, I can't. Now, they could be independent contractors theoretically if they have their own practice, but if you don't have your own practice and you wanted to work between a couple of physicians' offices, you wanted to work in a neurological group, there's places where optometrists really can greatly benefit patients that are not just optometric patients. And we're not allowed to do it because we have to have somebody watching over our shoulder all the time because we can't be trusted to be our own profession. And that's why I just think this, I'm not saying we shouldn't, we should be able to go and work for a veterinary clinic or something on that order, but we should be able to work for any licensed physician and surgeon in this state if that physician and surgeon could benefit from our expertise.
And what are you asking of the board?
I'm asking the board to consider requesting a repeal of the provision here that says that the only physician and surgeon that an optometrist could work for would be one who practices ophthalmology. And prioritizing this, it is probably a very low priority issue compared to the other things that we're discussing. But it's just something that maybe we should consider, not now, but maybe a year from now when children's vision is passed and everybody has 15 offices. It's just something to consider and possibly bring up in the future.
Were one of the stakeholders CNA by chance?
No.
Did see like
No.
Okay, questions, comments, Dr. McIntyre?
I'm trying to rephrase this in my head. So what's the other perspective on this? Why not? Why, yeah, we're current too. Someone help me out here.
So we can get the public, why don't we
Yes.
invite,
Yeah.
COA, please. I'm trying to get it. Okay, we'll take it from you. Okay.
It's gonna come back to go, so.
Catherine also Scott representing Lynchcrafters and ISAM. I think that we would ask that the board expand their look at employment for optometrists, as my earlier comments were associating sort of that concept again, that an optometrist, wherever they work is an optometrist regulated by the board and would be meeting their requirements under law. So limiting it to just physicians would to us seem narrow and was much of the conversation we had in 684 for the better part of 4 years, and there were some lawsuits involved and all of that good stuff. So I think we would ask it to go farther, and that helps framework the priorities for the board. I think it was fair for Dr. Trusky to say this is something we think about, but I think it would be a fairly big undertaking, to be fair. We would ask it to go farther. I'm Kara Cortez on behalf of California Optometric Association. I'm taking it a little bit different angle. So optometrists can be employed by different physicians as long as a physician structures their practice in a certain way, which is outlined in your memo. As long as a physician or a physician group sets up a professional corporation, then the optometrist can be employed. The situation that I believe Dr. Turetsky was talking about was the physician, him or herself, wanted to just directly employ the optometrist instead of setting up a professional corporation. So from our purview, there already is an avenue for an optometrist to work in these settings as long as the business is structured in this manner.
Dr. McIntyre, does that answer what you were framing?
No.
So the onus is on the physician to change the way he or she operates in order to incorporate an optometrist in the practice. But if they wanted to incorporate an ophthalmologist in the practice, they don't have to do anything.
What is the disadvantage of having an optometrist working for a non-ophthalmologist though? What
is the advantage or disadvantage?
The disadvantage. Yes. Why was
Working for a pediatrician, like if I'm a pediatrician and I want to include an optometrist, and so that the kid can come and, because under current law, or I can do a comprehensive eye exam, but I want to contract with an optometrist to do it. Currently, I could not do that.
Unless you were licensed, unless you changed the way you were licensed.
So I agree, I don't know what the disadvantage
It
is.
seems like just an archaic law
Yeah,
that
that's what I'm
But
trying to
wasn't
get.
the statute from before the law of
1974.
was brought, right? So that's when the scope was much more narrow. They felt that there needed to be supervision. Now that scope has broadened,
Yeah, we couldn't even dilate folks when this law was enacted.
Jessica.
I think that the intent too goes to the ability of someone with no experience in or specialized experience in the eye being able to direct an optometrist, and you have potentially the corporate practice of medicine happening, and you potentially have, say, a dermatologist who doesn't specialize in the eye directing an optometrist of how, and influence an optometrist in making decisions on the eye care. I think that was the initial concern. Whether that's a valid concern now, that's for the board to. But I think that was the intent, was to essentially make it to where the optometrist isn't directed by someone who has lesser experience or specialty in the eye than what they have.
But that optometrist is still governed by the board.
Correct.
Who they're
Exactly.
employed by, so it really doesn't matter. They have to reach that certain standard of care. Yeah.
If I'm the pediatrician and it's my practice, I'm taking on all the legal responsibilities for the practice. And maybe there's optometrists who are like, I don't want to take that on. I just want to go and I'm going to work and I'm going to go home.
To your point with the dermatologist, my group had a Medi-Cal thorough audit several years back, and the auditor that the state put in charge was a gynecologist. And our question to the state was, how can a gynecologist effectively evaluate an optometric practice? And the state responded that that a gynecologist is a physician, and a physician knows all the systems of the body.
Mr. Margarone.
So maybe this goes into the basket, Mark Mordova's basket of laws that are probably anti-competitive, that with very little standard of care intent behind it. I would vote in principle that whatever Dr. Rescue said, recommended this law be repealed, but I don't think we should devote much board resources to doing it, because I think we have some bigger fish to fry.
Not at this time.
Yeah.
So are you saying, let's just put this in the hopper to introduce legislation next year to get rid of it?
Sure.
And not do stakeholder meetings and all of that, just say, this is what we think, we're going to put it forward?
We don't have time to just state.
Okay.
They're just not the resources to deal with this, and children's vision branch office licenses.
So I move that we introduce legislation to get rid of this,
The ophthalmological required office.
that would be it, in the 2019 legislative session.
And I'll
2019
second.
or 2020?
2019.
We have children's vision that will be happening in 2020.
No, but we're just gonna introduce the bill, we're not gonna,
But that'll still be overlapping.
well, we can introduce more than one bill.
So then that means that we will add this to the plate.
We will add this to the plate, but to Mark's point, I don't know that we need to do a ton of, let's just see what happens.
And to clarify, you're proposing striking the portion that says in the third paragraph, third line down, and who practices in the specialty of ophthalmology. That's the portion that you want to strike.
Yes.
And who's sponsoring this, just to re-clarify us?
The board.
Yeah, but we can't do this in regulation.
No, see, you have work to do.
I would, we haven't even heard from
Yeah,
the CNA yet on if they would automatically be supportive of this. I can't imagine they wouldn't, but we always get
Who, I'm
surprised.
sorry, who did you say?
CMA.
Oh.
So we tend to get surprised sometimes by opinions of others. So before us making a commitment that we're going to take this kind of action, I think there's a little more homework that wouldn't necessarily take a lot of work to make sure that it would be easier than harder and not turn into a scope or turf battle. So I'm not quite ready to say that we should make a commitment to 2019.
What if we say by 2020? by the 2020 legislative session.
Well, that's in the middle of the 2-year session. It's 1920, so then you would be in a situation where you're, like now, you'd be introducing it now, you have a much shorter time period to try to get it through. So if you want to do something, you either do it in 2019 or 2022. No, 2021, sorry. But we could certainly have some stakeholder meetings, to your point, and maybe CMA would like us on this, and then they won't go back off on the other stuff.
I'm not sure we want to spend any time on this in the next coming year.
Can we at least talk with the CMA and see, get their opinions? Like if they don't have a problem with it, then maybe they don't have any objections.
I have a suggestion, why don't we put it on the agenda again for the next Ledge Reg Committee meeting? Make sure we reach out to CMA, to anyone else who we think would be a stakeholder in this. Give them an opportunity to come to Ledge Reg, because that'll probably be in Sacramento. And then we can there's nothing we can do. We still have 2 other board meetings before we have to make any decision, and then we can see what happens, and then we can make a decision at the next. We don't have to decide today.
So are you withdrawing your?
Yeah, I'm withdrawing it.
Okay.
Second withdrawal.
I'm saying moving, we don't have to make a motion to move it to Ledge Reg, right?
No.
Okay.
Okay, any other comments about moving this to Ledge Reg?
Are you okay with that?
Public, okay with that too? Public down to 1? Public down to 1, that's true. That's true, hiding behind. All right, I think we're there.
You get a prize?
Can't see behind Todd.
Well, I'm leaving soon.
Oh.
Prize may be taken away.
Okay, last but not least,
We have elections.
I don't know, we could probably talk about the handbook, there's only 2 things.
Let's do the elections,
Yeah.
Okay, so members, on the memo for the election of officers, it's identified that you have nominations for president, vice president, and secretary. President is Ms. Brandbein, the nomination, and nomination for vice president is Dr. Tresky, and a nomination for secretary is Rachel. All nominees have accepted the nominations, and so at this point, I'd like to take president first and offer any other elections from the floor prior to going to statements from Ms. Brandbein. Are there any elections from the floor for president? I'm sorry, nominations from the floor? No? Okay. Ms. Brandbein, would you like to make a statement?
3 quick points and then we can move on.
Quick.
Continuity in leadership, continuity in administrative processes, and commitment to the board agenda. So leadership for the points of, we've even reduced turnaround time in approvals of travel and entertainment expenses, but they're not really entertainment expenses, it's meeting related expenses. Emails, I think I'm responding within 24 to 48 with the exception of the one in 1 year that kind of got lost. It took 4 days instead of the 1 to 2. And consistency, so the annual review process, as you saw, was a labor, but deservingly so, and moved it all the way through the governor's office, which I haven't even reported on, and some, and lobbied with causes with DCA to get staff and other key issues that require DCA attention. The commitment you've seen, I'm here for you, and the public, as well as realign the committees so that we're meeting effectively, making traction on our strategic plan, and we tried a new process and it seems to be working. That's it. I'm done.
So with that, since there's one candidate, I'm going to either ask for your aye or no vote. And I'm going to go in order. Ms. Brandbein?
Aye.
Dr. Tresky?
Aye.
Ms. Michelin?
Aye.
Dr. Chawla is absent. Ms. Garcia?
Aye.
Dr. Kawaguchi?
Aye.
Dr. McIntyre?
Aye.
Mr. Mordomi?
Aye.
Ms. Berber?
Aye.
Dr. Wong?
Aye.
All right, congratulations.
Thank you. I'll do it another year.
Dr. Turetsky, would you like to make, oh wait, before we open it up, are there any nominations from the floor for vice president? All right, Dr. Turetsky, other than the statement that you provided in the materials, would you like to make any final statements?
It's all there.
I read it.
I wrote
I was inspired.
Okay, with that, I will go
We are definitely punchy.
take roll. Ms. Brandwein?
Aye.
Dr. Turetsky?
Aye.
Ms. Michelin?
Aye.
Dr. Chawla is absent. Ms. Garcia?
Aye.
Dr. Kawaguchi?
Aye.
Dr. McIntyre?
Aye.
Mr. Mordomi?
Aye.
Ms. Berger?
Aye.
Dr. Wong?
Aye.
All right, congratulations, Dr. Turetsky. All right, at this time for secretary, are there any additional nominations from the floor? Okay, Ms. Michelin, would you like to make any statements?
No.
Okay, so with that, we'll go down the roll call again. Ms. Brandwein?
Aye.
Dr. Turetsky?
Aye.
Ms. Michelin?
Aye.
Dr. Chawla is absent. Ms. Garcia?
Aye.
Dr. Kawaguchi?
Aye.
Dr. McIntyre?
Aye.
Mr. Mordomi?
Aye.
Ms. Berger?
Aye.
Dr. Wong?
Aye.
Motion passes. Congratulations. And thank you all for your willingness to serve and stay with me. So, thank you.
Okay, there was a request to revisit the board member handbook without this.
We just have to vote on 2 issues, right?
Yeah,
To come back to it.
it's up to you guys. It doesn't matter.
Board members, do you want to spend another 5?
Yes.
5 minutes, let's get it over.
Okay. Jessica,
Okay, really quickly, one of the amendments that was discussed at the last meeting about revamping the per diem, and there were some suggested amendments to streamlining the process, and those amendments are reflected in the board member handbook. I've also sent it to the secretary ahead of time to make sure it's capturing her notes as well, and she has agreed that it does. And then there's another minor change into the board member attendance. There is a recommendation to change the portion that says with his or her request for an excused absence, instead changing that to prior to the board meeting. And the reason being in our minutes is capturing excused absences, but there hasn't been any recording that we have seen historically to where it's been documented as excused versus unexcused, and the legislature has never asked that. When they ask about attendance, they want to know if the person's there or not. And so with that, it's not really so much of a request for an excused absence, it's just notifying the executive officer and the president of the absence prior to the meeting. So those were the 2 minor changes that are proposed, and so leave it for discussion.
I have a question. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, the timesheet requirement, Mina, is there some kind of requirement, or would it just be good business practice where board members are providing still documentation either through email or otherwise to the board,
I think
a recordation
I
of the
think still
hours?
there has to be a mechanism
Okay.
to still.
So when we're saying timesheet, that is on the board staff's end that they fill out on behalf of board members?
No, so the timesheet hasn't been getting done by members, because if you recall when this was initially proposed, it was an actual timesheet with requirements to it. That's not being done. What's now being done is you're emailing Kelly at the end of the month of what you're claiming, and then that goes to the president for approval. After that, it does go on to a huge long form that's like huge that we fill out, and that's still going to be required, so it doesn't change any of that.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. Other questions?
So remind me, in our sunset report, when we report the attendance and absence, we don't even say that they were excused absences or not? Okay.
No, and I provided a link to the sunset report to give you an example, because that's where we looked to.
Yeah.
And all it says is if they attended, and there's a yes/no column. And so that's all that's captured.
Just clicking up the language.
Yeah, okay, and then I guess it doesn't matter, and maybe this is a kind of rare instance, but on the per diem, I like these changes. I guess it's okay that if someone prepares for the meeting but doesn't attend for whatever reason, they'd still get the $100 for
No,
preparation.
I would think you would only get it if you attend.
Attend? Okay, I'm okay with that too.
But then
Right.
that has to be clarified in here, that
It does say per diem for board meeting attendance, so.
And
And-
preparation.
and preparation.
Right, and 100 per diem for.
It doesn't
But
So
say.
you're saying if they prepare and don't
Yeah, I
attend,
can't
they
say, oh,
can't
I'm
get
gonna,
the
and then I
100.
decide at the last minute I can't come, I don't get $100 for the one
Preparing
to
anyway.
prepare. I think you have to come to the meeting.
Well, it says and.
But I don't, there's no qualifier there that you need to be present at the board meeting.
So $100, so if I can wordsmith,
Yeah,
and $100 per diem for meeting preparations for meeting attended.
Oh, that's good, yeah,
Preparation for meeting attended.
attended. For meeting,
For a meeting attended.
one per board.
And I interpret that to mean if your preparation takes 2 days, you only get
Yeah,
100,
that's
right? That's
yeah.
the intent of
that's
it.
a flat
Yeah.
fee.
And the final check on that would be the board president has to approve it. It's not automatic.
Say for a committee meeting, you get $100 for prep, as long as you attend the committee meeting.
Yeah, same thing.
And council, is it clear from the amendments that if there's a meeting as we have now of 4 committee meetings in one day, I only get $100. I don't get $400.
Yeah,
I just want to make sure the language is clear as to
I
that.
think so,
Yeah.
per diem.
And is it then $100 for all meeting prep? For
Correct.
all committees?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay, and is that clear in this amendment
I think it's a
language?
little ambiguous, 100 per diem for more, it could mean $100 per every day you prepare for the meeting. So I think it could be
We
fixed a
need to
little bit.
tighten this, so if there is a
So why
motion,
don't you
it might
you could
be
do a
amended.
motion with my edits and.
Yeah,
I so move.
I'll second that.
Any public?
Can we clarify the motion for just clarify it's a motion to approve with her edits?
Correct.
Not just a
to tighten
motion.
up the language.
With her edits.
Thank you.
Well, there's still discretion for the president, like, so if
Correct.
there's somebody on a committee and they're doing like days worth of work, they could actually claim for days.
correct. Like if we're up and we're spending a week at the Capitol lobbying on the Children's Vision Bill, then we could say to Sid, here's all the stuff, then we have to.
No, blame, you can't. No, I'm just kidding.
Because then but I think in that case, as a board member, we have to document it and say,
Right.
here's why we're asking, it's on us to do that.
And that's why I was asking what is needed, what goes in, that then comes to the
And I think
president for
I think it's
review.
on us, we can't say to staff, you need to do it, it's a board member thing where we have to say to you, this is what I did, I'm asking for your
So
approval.
I'll push back when somebody says just
Exactly.
prep.
Okay, and then the second question is, are we also including in this motion the change for absences? Because I didn't hear that in there.
Yeah, I think it's to approve the.
To approve everything with giving legal counsel the ability to tighten language.
Yeah, so moved.
Second, and you seconded.
Lillian.
Lillian seconded.
Okay, any other comments from the board members? I'm looking down the road. All right, roll.
Ms. Brownbine. Dr. Transcripts. Ms. Michelina, aye. Ms. Garcia.
Aye.
Dr. Carpucci.
Aye.
Dr. McIntyre. Mr. Morgana.
Aye.
Ms. Salzman Sperber.
Aye.
Dr. Wong.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Meeting adjourned.
Wait, can I email you topics for next?
Oh,
Well, there was no future agenda, it wasn't on there, was it?
It was.
It is, it's on the agenda, and the only thing that we have pending still is a recommendation from Dr. Turetsky to look at opening up, accepting more online continuing education courses, and then also, Ms. Garcia's recommendation to look at, allowing optometrists to get CE for presentations at RTO colleges.
And then the one I wanted to look at is licensing for new licensees within the first 12 months if they already hold a license out of state. So what's happening now is that if you graduate within a optometry school within the first 12 months,
Yes.
you can get a license without having to provide 50 hours of CE.
Oh, got it.
If you hold an out-of-state license, like any of our residents, and you then apply for a California license, you have to do 50 hours of CE, even though it's within that first year.
Got it.
So it's like penalizing everybody who's doing a residency. So it's,
All right, so, and if there are any other items, you're able to email them in to Jessica, even after meetings are adjourned.
Correct.
Disciplinary guidelines.
Yes, always and forever.